Hey guys, tonight we are going to gently, very gently, shatter one of history's most romanticized illusions, the life of a pirate. We all have the image in our heads, right? The swashbuckling adventures, the chests overflowing with gold doubloons, the parrots squawking on shoulders, and the freedom of the open sea. It sounds like the ultimate escape from a boring 9-to-5 job, but the reality, especially when it came to dinner time, was less Pirates of the Caribbean and more like a grim, stomach-churning survival show. Honestly, based on the food alone, most of us probably would not have lasted the first week. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you are at it, let me know in the comments what city you are in and what time it is for you. I love seeing where you are all listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It all starts in a grimy, rain-slicked port town. Let's say it is Bristol, or maybe Nassau. Sometime in the early 1700s. The air hangs thick with the smell of coal smoke, cheap gin, and the ever-present dampness of the sea. Your life here is, well, it is not much of a life. You are either toiling for pennies in a workshop, facing the lash in the Royal Navy, or just trying to stay one step ahead of your debts. Every day is the same shade of gray. Then, one night in a dimly lit tavern, a man with a story in his eyes and a silver coin for a tooth starts spinning a yarn. He talks of a different life, a life of true liberty, where a man is his own master. He calls it the sweet trade. He speaks of a brotherhood, where every man gets a vote and an equal share of the prize. No kings, no cruel captains, just the laws you make for yourselves. He paints a picture of warm, turquoise waters, of raiding Spanish galleons laden with silver from the New World, of a life so full of adventure that your dreary existence here would seem like a bad dream. And you, tired of the mud and the monotony, you believe him. You believe every single word. You sign the ship's articles, a simple contract of no prey, no pay, and in that moment, your heart swells with a dangerous kind of hope. You have done it. You have traded your chains for the horizon. A small boat rows you out under a blanket of stars to the ship anchored in the bay. From a distance, she is a thing of beauty, a dark, elegant silhouette promising a new world. But as you get closer, the first warning sign arrives. It is not a sight, but a smell, a dense, complex wall of stench that hits you before you even touch the rope ladder. You climb aboard, your boots thudding onto the wooden deck, and the smell intensifies, wrapping around you like a wet blanket. It is a cocktail of scents you cannot quite place. There is the familiar tar and salt water, yes, but beneath it is the sour odor of unwashed bodies, the stale breath of cheap rum, and the unmistakable, stomach-turning aroma of bilge water that has festered for months in the ship's belly. And then, a new note joins the chorus, a greasy, smoky, slightly rancid smell wafting from a small, dark hatchway. That is the galley, the ship's kitchen. This is where the magic, or rather the misery, happens. As you stand there, clutching your small bundle of belongings, a man emerges from that hatchway. He is missing a leg, propped up on a crude wooden peg, and his face is permanently smudged with soot. This is your cook. On many pirate ships, the cook was not chosen for his culinary skills. He was often a sailor who had been maimed in a fight, no longer able to climb the rigging or man a cannon. His new post in the galley was a form of early retirement, a way to remain a useful member of the crew. He is a veteran, not a chef. He gives you a disinterested grunt, and you realize with a sinking feeling that the man responsible for your nourishment for the foreseeable future likely knows more about loading a pistol than seasoning a stew. You look around at your new home, at the rough-hewn faces of your new brothers, at the damp, crowded quarters. The dream of golden glory suddenly feels very, very far away. A nagging question begins to bubble up from the pit of your stomach, a question that historians still debate to this day. Was the golden age of piracy truly a quest for riches and freedom? Or was it simply an escape from something even worse? Was this a step up, or just a different kind of prison. As you breathe in the thick, foul air of your new reality, you suspect the answer lies somewhere in the murky, smelly middle. There is no turning back now. Your grand adventure has begun, and your first meal is coming. Your first night on the ship is less a sleep and more a series of fitful, swaying dozes. You are wedged into a hammock in the forecastle, a cramped, triangular space in the bow of the ship that smells powerfully of damp rope and unwashed men. The chorus of snores, cows, and the constant groaning of the ship's timbers is your new lullaby. When a bell clangs insistently somewhere on deck, you are not sure if it is morning or the middle of the night. It does not matter. It is the signal for the first meal of the day. You untangle yourself from your hammock, your muscles aching from the unfamiliar motion, and follow the shuffling figures up into the gray, treed on light. There is no dining hall, no neatly set tables. The crew is divided into small groups of 6 or 8 men, called a mess. Your mess gathers around a designated spot on the main deck. The boy, no older than 12, scurries over with your breakfast, a single wooden platter, more of a trough really, and a communal bucket of what looks like weak, lukewarm beer. On the platter are several identical, squarish objects. At first, you think they might be some kind of tile or a block of wood, for a game you do not yet know. They are pale, off-white, and look incredibly dense. This, a grizzled sailor next to you mutters, is ship's biscuit. He calls it that with a certain weary resignation, as if he is introducing an old enemy. You pick one up. It is surprisingly heavy and cold to the touch. It does not feel like food. It feels like a piece of geology. You tap it against the wooden deck. It makes a solid, satisfying thwack. You could probably knock a man out with this thing. A fellow new recruit, looking as bewildered as you, tries to take a bite. You watch in morbid fascination as he places the corner in his mouth and bites down. The result is not a crunch, but a dull, jarring clack as his teeth meet an unyielding surface, followed by a sharp intake of breath and a muttered curse. The veteran pirate, his face a roadmap of scars and sun damage, lets out a dry chuckle. Rookie mistake, he rasps, showing a gap where a tooth used to be. You will break your jaw if you break that. He then demonstrates the proper technique. He takes his biscuit, which he calls hardtack, and drops it into his tin cup of beer. He lets it sit there, submerged, for a few moments. You follow his lead, dropping your own biscuit into your cup. It sinks to the bottom with a resolute plunk, releasing a few lazy bubbles. This is the staple, the foundation of your diet for the foreseeable future. Hardtack was the original MRE, the non-perishable food of the age. It was a simple, brutal concoction: flour, water, and maybe a little salt. Bake 2, 3, or even for times until every last molecule of moisture had been bullied out of it. The result was a foodstuff so dry and dense that it could resist spoilage for months, even years. This was its sole virtue. In naval storehouses from London to Port Royal, these biscuits were stockpiled, sometimes for so long that they were already ancient before they even made it onto a ship. Historians still argue about just how old the average biscuit was. Was it months? Years? Some sailors swore they were eating biscuits baked for Queen Elizabeth's navy. The truth is likely somewhere in between. But one thing is certain, it was not fresh. After a few minutes, you fish the biscuit out of your cup. It has transformed. The rock-hard cracker is now a swollen, pulpy mass, the consistency of wet cardboard. It looks deeply unappetizing, but it is, at least. You take a tentative bite. The taste is, well, there is no taste. It is an absence of flavor. Avoid. You are chewing, but your tongue registers nothing but texture. It is a soggy, slightly gritty paste, with the faint, sour undertone of the cheap beer it was drowned in. The only other flavor is a subtle hint of dust, of the canvas sack it was stored in, of time itself. You sit down, swallow by swallow. It is not pleasant, but it fills your stomach. It is a dense, joyless lump of carbohydrates, designed for one purpose only, to provide the raw fuel needed to haul ropes and fire cannons. There is no pleasure here, no comfort, It is sustenance reduced to its most basic, miserable form. You look at the other men, methodically chomping on their own soggy biscuits, their faces impassive. This is normal for them. This is just breakfast. As you finish your piece, you cannot help but feel a profound sense of disappointment. This is the diet of a free man, of a fearsome pirate living on the fat of the land and sea. It tastes like poverty. It tastes like desperation. Still, you think, at least it is just bland. At least it is just a rock-hard, flavorless lump of flour. You could not possibly imagine it could get any worse than this. You are, of course, terribly wrong. The next few days pass in a blur of hard labor and nautical lessons. You learn to tie knots you never knew existed, to climb the dizzying heights of the rigging, and to scrub the deck until your knuckles are raw. And twice a day, every day, you face the hardtack. You become accustomed to the ritual of soaking it, to the bland, pasty texture, to the feeling of a lump of dough settling in your stomach. You think you have made your peace with it. You have accepted your bland, carb-heavy fate. Then comes the day you learn the biscuit's darkest secret. It happens during the midday meal. You are sitting with your mess, the sun beating down on the deck. You are about to drop your biscuit into your cup of grog, a new concoction you have been introduced to, a mix of water and rum, when the man next to you, the grizzled veteran, stops you. Hold a moment. Wait, he says, his eyes twinkling with a kind of grim amusement. He takes your biscuit from you and holds it up to the light. Let's see who is home. He gives the biscuit a sharp rap against the deck railing. You watch, confused, as a few tiny, black specks fall out onto the sun-bleached wood. They look like dirt. But then, one of them moves. It is a beetle, no bigger than a grain of rice, with a long, distinctive snout. A weevil, the old sailor announces, as if introducing a mutual friend, or as we like to call him, ship's carpenters. He gives the biscuit another harder rap, and a shower of them tumbles out, along with a few small, pale, wriggling things that look disturbingly like maggots. Your stomach does a slow, sickening lurch. You stare at the biscuit in his hand, a piece of food you were about to put in your mouth, and realize it is not a block of inert flour. It is a tenement building, a bustling, high-density habitat for a whole ecosystem of creatures. These, you learn, are your constant dining companions. The hardtack, stored for months or years in the ship's hold in canvas sacks, was the perfect breeding ground for insects. Weevil eggs, laid in the flour before it was even baked, would lie dormant, waiting for the right conditions of warmth and humidity in the ship's belly to hatch. The veteran pirate seems entirely unfazed. Extra protein, he shrugs, and pops a piece of the infested biscuit into his mouth. Chewing thoughtfully adds a bit of a nutty flavor. If you were lucky, the other men in your mess just nodded agreement, some even picking the larger weevils out and flicking them overboard with practiced indifference. The maggots, the larvae of the flower moth, are considered an even better delicacy by some. They call them bargemen. You learn the unofficial rules of eating hardtack. Rule 1. You do not inspect it too closely. Ignorance is bliss, and what you cannot see cannot make you gag. Rule 2. And this is the most important one. Whenever possible, you eat in the dark. As the sun sets, the crew will often wait for the cover of darkness to eat their evening ration. It is not for ambience. It is a simple, practical trick of self-deception. In the dim light of a single lantern, you cannot see the black specks. You cannot see the pale worms. You can just feel the familiar crunch of the weevils, which many sailors prefer to the soft squish of the maggots. In the dark, you can pretend it is just part of the biscuit's texture. You can lie to yourself. This is a piece of historical trivia that sounds like a joke, but is grimly true. Sailors would often tap their biscuits on the table not just to knock the insects out, but to give them a chance to scurry away. Some accounts even describe a strange sense of camaraderie, and I will not eat you if you run away fast enough kind of deal. Historians still debate the psychological impact of this. Did sailors truly become so accustomed to it that they did not care? Or was it a source of constant, low-grade, disgusting mental stress? For most, it was likely the latter, masked by a veneer of hardened indifference. That night, you try the technique. You sit in the gathering gloom, your biscuit held tight in your hand. You do not look at it. You just soak it in your grog. Take a deep breath and take a bite. You try to focus on the blandness of the dough, the burn of the rum, but you cannot ignore it. You feel a distinct, tiny pop between your teeth. It is not the hardtack. You swallow hard, your throat tight. It is official. You are no longer just a pirate in training. You are a man who eats insects for dinner. The romantic dream of the free life on the sea has been replaced by the very real, very crunchy, and deeply unpleasant reality of naval nutrition. You wonder if those Spanish galleons you are supposed to be raiding have any food that does not wriggle. You can only hope. Section for the insect-riddled hardtack is a psychological hurdle. But after wooden casks are lashed to the deck and stored below, filled with fresh water before you set sail. But like the hard a few weeks at sea, a more pressing, primal need begins to dominate your thoughts. Thirst. At the start of the voyage tag, what starts as a simple provision quickly becomes a source of daily misery. The concept of fresh water on the water was acceptable. It was drawn from the ship's main casks, and while it had a slightly long sea voyage is a cruel joke, your daily water ration is doled out under the watchful eye of the quarterwoody. Stale taste from the barrels. It was wet and it quenched your thirst. You were given a daily ration, usually about master, the man responsible for supplies. He stands by a cask known as the scuttlebutt, a communal barrel from which everyone drinks half a gallon, and you cherished every drop. But as the ship sails further into the warm, sun-drenched latitudes, you hold out your tin cup, and he uses a ladle to pour out a murky, yellowish-green liquid, the of the Caribbean. A foul transformation begins. One morning, you go to collect your ration from the scuttle, but first thing you notice is the smell. It is a swampy, stagnant odor, like a pond that has not seen rain in a year. The second thing you notice, as you bring the cup to your lips, is the main cask kept on deck for the crew to access. The mate ladles a cupful for you. A new texture. It is not quite water. It is thick, slightly slimy, and you can see tiny green specks of immediately notice something is wrong. The water is no longer clear. It has a sickly, greenish yellow tinge, with algae floating serenely within it. You take a hesitant sip. It tastes exactly how it smells, like rot, small, slimy-looking filaments suspended in it. You hold the cup to your nose and recoil. It smells like a light decay, like the bottom of a barrel that has been sitting in the sweltering tropical heat for far too long. Water swamp, like ponds come and decay. This is not just stale water anymore. It is alive. The wooden, stored in wooden casks for weeks on end, does not stay fresh. It is a perfect incubator. The water casks were a perfect incubator for life. In the stagnant, warm environment of the ship's hold, Algae bloom, algae flourishes. The water becomes a living soup of microorganisms, turning foul and ropey. Sailors had a bacteria would bloom with astonishing speed. The water would become a thriving, microscopic soup, turning slimy, green, and foul-smelling. Sailors called it ropey or stringy because of the long, gelatinous strands of algae that would name for it. Bilgy water. It was a treasure trove of potential illnesses, from dysentery to cholera. One sip of the wrong water could lay a man low for days, leaving him weak, dehydrated, and miserable. Form within it. To drink it was an act of desperation. You take a small, hesitant sip. The taste is even. You look at the other pirates. They down their ration without a flicker of disgust. This is their reality. They know that to force yourself to swallow, fighting the urge to spit it back out. This, you realize, is a far fresh water is one of the most precious and fleeting commodities on the open sea. Finding a source of it was a top priority, greater threat than weevils in your biscuit. Bad food might make you miserable, but bad water could kill you. DYS. Often more so than finding a ship to plunder. A pirate crew desperate for water was a dangerous and unpredictable thing. They would enter why cholera and all manner of gastrointestinal nightmares were rampant on long voyages, and contaminated water was the primary culprit. Risk storms and naval patrols just to find a remote island with a stream or a spring. The moment you made landfall, a pirate crew suffering from mass sickness was a vulnerable crew, unable to fight or even sail the ship effectively. So, keeping order of business was not burying treasure. It was filling the casks. One of the odd, lesser-known jobs, the water drinkable, or at least not immediately lethal, became a matter of life and death. The crew has on the ship belonged to the cooper. He was not just a barrel maker. He was a water chemist of a few low-tech solutions. Sometimes, they would drop a piece of hot iron into a cask, hoping the heat would sort. It was his job to maintain the casks, to try and keep the water drinkable for as long as possible, kill some of the microscopic life. Another method was to try and filter the water through a piece of cloth, This involved a variety of folk remedies and techniques. Sometimes they would drop a piece of silver into the cask, catch the larger strands of slime, but do little to remove the bacteria. Some ships added a splash of vinegar or citrus juice if they had it, which could slightly improve the taste and inhibit some bacterial growth. But these were all temporary, inadequate fixes. They, believing its properties would purify the water, an idea that has a faint echo in modern anti-imbricable science. More commonly, they would char strange bit of nautical lore you pick up is the belief in water, witches, or other supernatural beings who were blamed for fouling the inside of the barrels before filling them. The layer of charcoal acted as a primitive filter, absorbing some of the impurities in the water. If a ship's water turned particularly bad, particularly quickly, it was sometimes seen as a terrible omen, a curse of tastes, delaying the inevitable slide into slime. Historians are still trying to piece together all the desperate upon the voyage. Historians, of course, recognize this as a simple folk explanation for a bacteriological process they did not understand methods sailors used to make their water last. There are accounts of adding vinegar or citrus juice when available, not just for. The debate is not whether it was science or magic, but how deeply these superstitions affected morale and decision making on board flavor, but in the hope it would kill some of the animalcules they rightly suspected were lurking within. But the most, did a cursed cask of water ever lead a captain to abandon a planned route out of fear? It is common. The most famous and the most pirate-wise solution was elegantly simple. Add alcohol. You quickly learn why your daily ration is not just water. That grog was the brainchild of a British vice admiral named Edward Vernon, nicknamed Old Grog because of the geogram cloak he wore. He ordered the Navy's daily rum ration to be diluted with water to cut down on drunkenness. Pirates, ever the innovators in all things alcohol-related, adopted the practice for a different reason. The high alcohol content of the rum acted as a disinfectant. It killed a good portion of the bacteria sloshing around in the water, making it significantly safer to drink. It did not make the water taste good. It just made the foul taste secondary to the powerful, comforting burn of rum. So you stand there, staring into your cup of green, slimy liquid. It is a terrible choice. Drink it straight and risk a week of agonizing stomach cramps, or drink the grog and accept the low-level buzz of intoxication as a constant state of being. It is not really a choice at all. You take a deep breath, pinch your nose, and drain the cup of grog. The familiar fire of the rum scorches your throat, followed by the foul, swampy aftertaste of the water. It is a disgusting combination, but it is the taste of survival. You are drinking poison, mixed with another poison, to stay alive. The glamour of the pirate life takes another hit. You are beginning to suspect that the real treasure these men were seeking was not gold, but a clean, cool glass of water. Having accepted that your drinking water will henceforth be a cocktail of algae, bacteria, and rum, you begin to understand the central role of alcohol on a pirate ship. It is not just for raucous sea shanties and wild celebrations. It is a public health policy. It is medicine. It is a tool for survival. The daily grog ration becomes the anchor of your day. A moment you both dread and anticipate. You dread the slimy texture and foul taste of the water, but you crave the sanitizing fire of the rum. Grog, in its most basic form, was a simple mixture, 1 part rum, 2 for parts water. This was the recipe mandated by Admiral Vernon in the Royal Navy. And pirates, being former Navy men for the most part, adopted a similar ratio. The quartermaster, the same man who guarded the water, was also in charge of the rum. He would mix the grog in a large tub, often called the grog tub, in full view of the crew. This was a crucial piece of theater. It was to ensure every man saw that he was getting his fair, undiluted share. Trust was a fragile commodity on a pirate vessel, and a quartermaster suspected of watering down the rum, or rather, not adding enough rum to the water, could find himself in serious trouble. You quickly learn the nuances. The rum was not the refined, aged spirit you might imagine. It was often a harsh, fiery, newly distilled liquor, sourced cheaply from the sugar plantations of the Caribbean. It was called Killed Evil by the English islanders for a reason. It was potent, and burned all the way down, but it was precisely this potency that made it so effective at disinfecting the putrid water. The alcohol would kill a significant portion of the harmful bacteria, making the water much safer to consume and drastically reducing the incidence of dysentery and other waterborne illnesses that could cripple a crew. A strange and little discussed aspect of this is the forced, low-level intoxication of the entire crew for most of the day. From their morning ration to their evening one, the pirates' work ebbed in a state of being perpetually buzzed. Historians still debate the effect this had on the crew's efficiency and mood. Did it make them more reckless and belligerent, fueling the stereotype of the drunken pirate? Or did it, paradoxically, make them more manageable? A slightly tipsy crew might be less prone to the deep, existential dread that came with their harsh reality. The grog could have been a form of chemical morale booster, a way to take the sharp edges off a life of constant hardship and danger. It is a fascinating question. Was the drunken pirate a result of choice, or a side effect of their water purification system? Of course, pirates being pirates, they did not always stick to the basic recipe. When times were good, after a successful raid, they might add a squeeze of lime or lemon juice to the grog. This was not just for flavor. They knew, through brutal trial and error, that citrus helped ward off the dreaded disease of scurvy, even if they did not know the science behind it. They might also add a sprinkle of sugar and some nutmeg, transforming the crude grog into a more luxurious drink called bumbo-o. This was a true pirate delicacy, a sign of prosperity. To be drinking bumbo-o meant you were on a successful, well-stocked ship. You watch as the men line up for their ration, a ritual that is both mundane and deeply serious. Fights could break out if one man thought another got a larger ladle full. The grog tub was the ship's water cooler, its tavern, and its pharmacy all rolled into one. It was where news was exchanged, grievances aired, and friendships forged. Your own relationship with grog becomes complicated. On the one hand, you resent your dependence on it. You hate the taste and the constant, dull headache that seems to live behind your eyes. On the other hand, you are profoundly grateful for it. You have seen what happens to men who, for whatever reason, try to stick to the water alone. They spend their days weak and miserable, doubled over with cramps. The grog, for all its faults, keeps you on your feet. It keeps you functional. One evening, as you sip your ration, the old, grizzled sailor from your first day sidles up to you. Never forget. Lad, he says, his voice low. The rum is a friend, but a fickle one. It keeps the flux from your gut, but it can steal the sense from your head. He tells you a story about a ship that captured a Spanish vessel loaded with wine. In their celebration, the pirates drank themselves into a stupor. The next day, a British naval frigate appeared on the horizon. The pirates were too hungover and disorganized to mount a proper defense. Most were captured and hanged. His story is a stark reminder. The rum is a tool, a necessary evil, but it is a razor's edge. Too little, and you succumb to disease. Too much, and you succumb to carelessness. Your life on this ship is a constant balancing act, and the grog is the fulcrum. It is both your salvation and a constant, simmering threat. Now that you have made a fragile peace with your liquid rations, your attention is inevitably drawn back to solid food, beyond the weevil-infested hardtack. The other main feature of your diet is the salted meat. Before you left port, you watched as the crew loaded dozens of heavy wooden casks into the hold. You assumed they were filled with more water or run. You were wronged. They were filled with your protein for the next 6 months. This is the fabled salt beef and salt pork you have heard sailors grumble about. The process of preserving meat for a long sea voyage was, like everything else about this life, a brutal exercise in practicality. Fresh meat would rot in days in the tropical heat. The only way to keep it edible, a term used very loosely here, was to cure it in an enormous amount of salt. The beef and pork would be cut into chunks and layered in barrels with coarse, grainy salt. A thick, syrupy brine would then be poured over the top to fill any remaining gaps. The barrels were sealed, and the meat was left to pickle in its own salty tomb for weeks, months, sometimes even years. The salt would draw out every bit of moisture, making the meat an inhospitable environment for the bacteria that cause spoilage. The day comes when the cook and his mate hoist one of these casks onto the deck. The air is already thick with a strange, acrid, chemical smell. The cook takes a hammer and chisel to the lid, and with a final, splintering crack, it comes loose. The smell that erupts from the barrel is not the savory aroma of cured ham. It is a deeply unpleasant, pungent odor of old brine, stale fat, and something else, something faintly chemical and rotten. You peer into the barrel. Inside, swimming in a murky, grayish liquid, are lumps of a dark, indeterminate color. Some pieces are a disconcerting shade of deep red, almost black, while others are pale, fatty gray. The cook's mate, the young boy, uses a long hook to fish out a few of these pieces. They land on the deck with a wet, heavy thud. This is your dinner. The first problem is the salt. The meat is so thoroughly impregnated with salt that it is completely inedible as is. So, the first step is to try and desalinate it. The chunks are tied to a rope and tossed overboard, left to drag behind the ship in the seawater for several hours. This, in theory, is supposed to draw some of the excess salt out. In practice, it just exchanges the coarse barrel salt for the slightly less intense salt of the ocean. After its bath, the meat is brought back on board. You pick up a piece. It is incredibly hard and dense, with a texture like petrified wood. The sailors have a name for it: salt junk, old horse, or sometimes, more poetically, mahogany. The fibers of the meat have become so tough and stringy from the curing process that they are nearly impossible to chew. The cook's primary job is to try and render this lump of salty wood into something that can be swallowed without causing a dental emergency. This usually involves boiling it for hours and hours in a large cauldron of the ship's slimy, green water. The galley fills with a cloud of steam that smells like a salt factory crossed with a rendering plant. When it is finally served, it is a sad, gray, stringy mess floating in a thin, greasy broth. You take a piece and try to chew it. It is like gnawing on a rope that has been soaked in seawater. It is a battle of attrition for your jaw muscles. The taste is overwhelmingly salty, with a faint, oh my, and slightly spoiled undertone. Sometimes, the meat at the top of the barrel, not fully submerged in the brine, would go bad. The cook would simply scrape off the green, fuzzy bits and boil it anyway. Waste was not an option. One of the bizarre, lesser-known facts about this meat is its occasional phosphorescence, due to certain salt-loving bacteria. Chunks of salt beef would sometimes glow in the dark with a faint, greenish light. Sailors, living in a world of superstition, often took this as a ghostly omen, tall yet burning. Historians now understand this as simple bioluminescence, but to a pirate in the dark belly of a ship, a piece of meat that glowed on its own was a deeply unsettling sight. Imagine waking up in your hammock to see your dinner emitting a spectral light. It is no wonder these men were so superstitious. The academic debate here is subtle but interesting. Was the meat actually nutritious? While it provided protein and calories, The intense salting process destroyed many of the vitamins. Furthermore, the fat would often turn rancid, which could cause severe stomach upset. So while it kept starvation at bay, it did little to prevent the nutritional deficiencies that plagued every sailor. You saw it as a cruel trade-off. You could fill your belly with this salty, stringy substance, but it offered no real nourishment, no protection from the creeping horror of scurvy that you were beginning to hear whispered about. You looked down at your meal, a soggy lump of hardtack floating in a greasy broth next to a piece of stringy, gray mahogany. This is the pinnacle of pirate cuisine. This is what you get on a good day. It is a meal that provides calories but no joy, sustenance but no health. You saw through the tough fibers you are making and wonder if the Spanish sailors you are meant to be fighting are eating any better. You begin to suspect that on the high seas, every honest dinner is just a different shade of miserable. Presiding over this daily culinary tragedy is the ship's cook. On your vessel, he is a man named Silas, though most just call him Peg on account of the crude wooden leg he stomps around on. You quickly learn that on a pirate ship, the cook is a figure of immense importance and, paradoxically, very little prestige. He is not a celebrated chef. He is a wounded veteran. Silas lost his leg to a cannonball 2 years ago, no longer able to scramble up the rigging or lead a boarding party. He was given the honorable discharge of the galley. It was this, or be cast off the crew. His domain is a small, cramped, and perpetually smoky cubicle near the ship's stern. It is more of a scorched alcove than a kitchen. The centerpiece is a brick hearth, a firebox precariously balanced in gimbal lead, designed to stay level even as the ship rolls and pitches. This is a crucial piece of engineering to prevent the whole ship from catching fire. Even so, on rough days, hot coals and splatters of boiling grease are a constant hazard. Silas's arms are a tapestry of old burned scars. His job is less cooking, more a form of alchemy, turning the inedible into the barely edible. His tools are as crude as his ingredients. He has a few large iron cauldrons, a long-handled ladle, a very large, sharp knife that looks more like a weapon, and a wooden cutting board permanently stained with the ghosts of 1,000 miserable meals. There are no spice racks, no fresh herbs, no delicate sauces. His primary seasonings are salt, soot, and resignation. His job is not to delight the palate, but to quell the rumbling in 200 stomachs. You watch him work one day. He moves with a surprising, limping grace in the cramped space. He is boiling the day's ration of mahogany, the salty beef, in a cauldron of green water. In another pot, he is simmering a thick porridge of dried peas or oatmeal, another staple of the diet. This mush, known as burgoo or loblolly, was oft unserved for breakfast. It was bland, filling, and required minimal chewing, which was a blessing for the many men who already had loose teeth. Silas's great culinary innovation is to mix everything together. He will shred the boiled, stringy beef and stir it into the oatmeal porridge, creating a single, homogeneous, grayish-brown slop. He calls this dish skill agali. It looks appalling, but it is efficient. It delivers protein and carbs in one easy-to-swallow package. A little-known fact about pirate cooks is that they were also, by default, the ship's brewers and bakers, if you can call it that. When the hardtack was particularly infested, he would sometimes pound it into dust, mix it with water and whatever slushy fat he could skim off the top of the boiled meat, and fry it into greasy little cakes on a skillet. They were called dandy funks, and they were a way to disguise the taste and texture of the weevils. He was also in charge of the small beer brewed on board, a weak, low-alcohol beer that was sometimes safer to drink than the water at the start of a voyage, before it had time to turn completely foul. The cook occupied a strange, precarious position in the ship's hierarchy. He was essential, but he was also a constant target of ridicule and complaint. Every man on board was a food critic. They would grumble about the saltness of the beef, the blandness of the burgoo, the ever-present crunch of weevils. Yet, they depended on him completely. A good-natured cook could improve morale, while a sullen, careless one could make an already difficult life unbearable. Historians sometimes debate the cook's role in shipboard mutinies, while the captain or quartermaster's cruelty was often the spark. A long period of particularly bad food could certainly be the kindling. A crew with empty, aching stomachs is an angry, mutinous crew. Was Silas just a cook? Or was he also the ship's morale officer, fighting a losing battle with terrible ingredients? Silas himself is a quiet, grim man. He rarely speaks, communicating mostly in grunts and gestures. But you notice small things. You see him carefully skimming the greenists come off the top of the boiling water. You see him giving the youngest cabin boy a slightly less weevil-filled piece of biscuit. These are small acts of humanity in a profoundly inhumane environment. He knows the food is terrible. He knows the men are miserable. He cannot fix the ingredients, so he does what little he can to control the process. One evening, you see a few of the men huddled around the galley, passing something around. It is a captured sea turtle, a rare and celebrated prize. Silas is in his element. For the first time, you see a flicker of life in his eyes. He is working with fresh meat. He expertly butchers the turtle, using every part. The meat is stewed into a rich, savory dish called collie pea and collie pash, the gelatinous parts of the turtle that were considered a great delicacy. For one night, the crew eats like kings. They eat fresh, flavorful food, and they toast Silas, the cook, their hero. For one night, he is not a broken-down sailor making slop. He is a chef, creating a feast. The next morning, it is back to boiled salt beef and hardtack. The brief moment of culinary grace is over. But it is a reminder that even in this grim world, a single good meal could feel like a miracle. And Silas, the one-legged cook, was the man who performed it. You have been at sea for several weeks now, and a new, more insidious enemy than bad food or foul water begins to make its presence felt. It starts subtly. You notice a profound sense of weariness settling deep into your bones, a fatigue that no amount of sleep can cure. Your muscles ache, not from work, but with a dull, persistent throb. At first, you dismiss it as part of life at sea, but then other symptoms begin to appear. It starts in your mouth. Your gums feel tender and swollen. When you chew your soggy hardtack, there is a faint, metallic taste of blood. You look in the small, cracked piece of mirror you own, pulling back your lip. Your gums are a dark, purplish color, and they look puffy and soft. A few days later, you notice a spot of blood on your biscuit after you bite into it. A sense of cold dread begins to creep over you. You have heard the old sailors whispering about this. They call it the plague of the sea. It is scurvy. Scurvy was the scourge of all long-distance sea travel in the age of sail. It was a mysterious and terrifying disease. Nobody knew what caused it, but everyone knew its effects. It was a slow, agonizing process of bodily decay. It was caused, as we now know, by a severe deficiency of vitamin C, ascorbic acid. The human body cannot produce its own vitamin C, so it must be obtained from diet, primarily from fresh fruits and vegetables. The pirate diet of hardtack, salted meat, and stale water contain virtually none. After 6 to 8 weeks without any vitamin C, the body's ability to produce collagen begins to fail. Collagen is the glue that holds the body together. It is essential for skin, blood vessels, and connective tissues. Without it, the body literally begins to fall apart. You start to notice the signs in others. You see a man wince as he bites into an apple he had been hoarding. His teeth now painfully loosen their sockets. You see another sailor with strange, dark bruises appearing on his legs and arms, even though he has not been injured. These are spontaneous hemorrhages. As the capillaries under his skin become fragile and burst, old wounds, even scars that healed years ago, can mysteriously reopen and begin to fester as the tissue breaks down. The ship starts to take on the atmosphere of a floating hospital ward, but one where there is no cure, only a slow, sure decline. A strange and particularly cruel symptom that some sailors reported was a sudden, overwhelming depression and lethargy. Men would become irritable, sullen, and lose all motivation. This is one of the more debated aspects of the disease among historians. How much did the psychological despair of scurvy contribute to the breakdown of discipline on a ship? Was the legendary grumpiness and volatility of sailors a personality trait, or a collective chemical imbalance caused by malnutrition? It is likely a vicious cycle. The miserable conditions caused despair, and the scurvy amplified it. You feel this yourself. A dark cloud seems to have settled over your mind. The dream of freedom and gold now seems like a childish fantasy. All you can think about is the dull ache in your joints and the spongy, bleeding flesh in your mouth. The simple act of climbing the rigging becomes a monumental effort. Your world shrinks, becomes defined by your own slow, internal collapse. The older sailors, who have seen this all before, look on with a grin, fatalistic calm. They know the progression. After the sore gums and lethargy comes the next stage. Your joints will swell and become excruciatingly painful. Your skin will become dry and scaly. Your breath will take on a foul, putrid odor from the decaying tissue in your mouth. In the final stages, you would suffer from jaundice, fever, and uncontrolled bleeding from the nose, mouth, and bowels. Death was slow, undignified, and agonizing. This is the gentle kiss of scurvy. Its first warning. It is a promise of the horrors to come if you do not find a source of fresh food soon. The entire mood of the ship shifts. The hunt for a Spanish galleon is temporarily forgotten. The new, all-consuming obsession is the hunt for land. Any land, an island, a coastline, anywhere that might have a patch of green, a single fruit-bearing tree. The lookout in the crow's nest is no longer searching for sails on the horizon, but for the dark smudge of an island. The survival of the entire crew now depends on a chance encounter with a bit of dirt in the middle of this vast, empty ocean. The race is on, not against a rival ship, but against your own body's slow, inexorable decay. Your fate, and the fate of every man on this ship, now rests on finding it or inch. The initial warning signs of scurvy have now blossomed into a full-blown epidemic on board. The ship, once a vessel of predators, has become a floating infirmary, adrift on a sea of suffering. What began as sore gums and weariness has escalated into a gallery of horrors, and you have a front row seat to the slow, systematic dismantling of the human body. Your own condition has worsened. Your teeth, which a few weeks ago were merely tender, are now frighteningly loose. You can wiggle them with your tongue. Eating your soaked hardtack is an exercise in pain management, trying to mash the pulp against the roof of your mouth to avoid putting any pressure on your agonizingly sensitive gums, which now bleed freely at the slightest touch. Your joints have swollen to the point where your knees and ankles feel like bags of hot fluid. Every step is a jolt of pain, and climbing into your hammock at night is an ordeal that leaves you breathless and sweating. But it is seeing the effects on the men around you that is truly terrifying. You see tough, hardened pirates who have survived cannon fire and sword fights now laid low, weeping in their hammocks from the constant, gnawing pain in their limbs. Their skin has taken on a pale, sallow complexion, dotted with the dark, spreading blotches of subcutaneous bleeding. The deck of the ship begins to smell of sickness, a foul, metallic odor of decay that seems to cling to the damp wood. One of the most disturbing unwell-documented symptoms of advanced scurvy is the putrefaction of the gums. You see a man trying to speak, and you recoil in horror. His gums have become so swollen and necrotic that they have grown out over his teeth, forming a black, spongy mass of rotting flesh that spills from his mouth. His breath is a foamy asthma of decay. Soon, his teeth, their anchors dissolved, will simply fall out, leaving him unable to chew anything at all. He will be forced to subsist on thin gruel and watery broth, a death sentence of slow starvation even if he were to somehow survive the disease itself. The psychological toll is just as devastating. The lethargy has morphed into a profound, immobilizing depression. Men lie listlessly, staring at the ceiling. All fight gone from them. Conversations die down, replaced by a chorus of groans and whimpers. The camaraderie of the crew, the brotherhood that was promised, evaporates under the strain of universal misery. It is every man for himself in his own private hell. A fascinating unmacabre historical footnote is the effect of scurvy on old injuries. The body, unable to produce the collagen needed to maintain tissue, loses its ability to hold itself together. Scars from wounds that healed perfectly decades ago can suddenly and inexplicably split open, raw and weeping as if the injury just occurred. You see this happen to Silas, the cook. The long, white scar on his forearm from a forgotten knife fight begins to turn purple, then slowly unzips itself, revealing the raw flesh beneath. It is a grotesque miracle in reverse, the body literally unhealing itself, erasing its own history of repair. Historians still marvel at the sheer biological horror of this symptom, a perfect illustration of collagen failure. The academic world still discusses the sheer scale of the mortality. It is estimated that scurvy killed more sailors than all other causes combined, more than storms, shipwrecks, combat, and all other diseases. Some estimates suggest over 2 million sailors died from scurvy during the age of sail. It was a pandemic that lasted for centuries, a predictable, recurring catastrophe. The tragedy is that the cure was oft unreadily available, if only they had understood the cause. Indigenous populations knew about the curative properties of certain plants, but this knowledge was often dismissed or ignored by European sailors. You are now living in this reality. More than half the crew is incapacitated. The few who are still able to walk, themselves weakened and in pain, struggle to manage the sails and steer the ship. A strong gust of wind could spell doom for you all, as there are not enough healthy hands to respond. Your pirate ship, once a fearsome weapon, is now a crippled, drifting ghost ship, crewed by the dying. The hunt for gold feels like a story from another lifetime. All that matters now is a sliver of green on the horizon. The captain, his own face pale and drawn, has abandoned all other plans. The charts are out, and the course is set for the nearest known island, a tiny speck on the map that might as well be the fountain of youth. It is a desperate gamble. If you do not find land in the next week, there will not be enough men left alive to even drop the anchor. Your life has been reduced to a simple, brutal equation. Vitamin C, or a slow, painful death, just as the last vestiges of hope are beginning to curdle into despair. A cry comes from the crow's nest. Land ho! The words are weak, choked from a raw, scurvy-ridden throat, but they electrify the ship. Those who can stand stumble to the railing. Those who cannot prop themselves up, a flicker of life returning to their sunken eyes. And there it is, not a smudge, not a cloud, but a definite, dark green line on the horizon. It is an island. Salvation. The next few hours are a blur of frantic, clumsy activity. The handful of able-bodied men, spurred on by a surge of adrenaline, manage the sails. The ship, which has been drifting listlessly, now has a purpose, inching its way toward the shore. As you get closer, you can make out details. A white sandy beach, a dense jungle of vibrant green, and the unmistakable sight of palm trees. The very color green seems like a miracle, a feast for your starved eyes, but your relief is cut with a new anxiety. As you approach the coast, you see another mast peeking over a small cove. There is another ship here, a merchant vessel. Under normal circumstances, this would be a cause for celebration. The prize, a fat merchantman ripe for the plucking. But now, you are in no condition to fight. With most of your crew incapacitated, you are hopelessly outmatched. The captain calls a brief. Horse cancel. The decision is swift and unanimous. You will not fight for gold. You will fight for groceries. The plan is desperate and reckless. You will make a show of force, hoping to intimidate the merchant crew into surrendering without a real fight. Your ship is maneuvered into the mouth of the cove, blocking their exit. The gun ports are opened, revealing your cannons, a terrifying sight. Even if you barely have enough healthy men to fire a single one, the Jolly Roger is hoisted, the black flag with its skull and crossbones sending a clear, terrifying message. A boarding party is assembled. It is a pathetic sight. 8 dozen men, including yourself, armed with pistols and cutlasses. You are all gaunt, bruised, and weak, your faces grim masks of pain. You are relying on reputation and terror alone. You clamber into the longboat, your joints screaming in protest. Every pull of the oar is an agony. As you row toward the merchant ship, you can see the crew gathering on their deck, their faces a mixture of fear and confusion. They are clearly outnumbered, but they look healthy, well-fed. The sight of their robust forms fills you with a bitter, desperate envy. You climb aboard their vessel, a wave of pirates powered by nothing but sheer will. You brandish your cutlass, trying to look menacing, but your arm feels like it is made of lead. The merchant captain, a stout man with a sensible face, takes one look at your ragged, decaying crew and makes a wise decision. He offers no resistance. He surrenders the ship, but your captain does not ask for the strong cups. He does not ask for the cargo in the hold. He makes one simple, urgent demand. Show me your larder. Show me your fruit. The merchant captain leads you to his ship's stores. Then there, in a small, ventilated room, is the most beautiful sight you have ever seen. Crates of oranges, lemons, and limes. The air is thick with the sharp, clean, heavenly scent of citrus. It is the smell of life itself. The men let out a collective, ragged sigh. Some of them start to weep openly, tears tracking through the grime on their faces. You stare at a bright orange lemon as if it were the largest diamond in the world. There is no fighting, no hoarding. The pirates, your fearsome brothers, handle the fruit with a reverence you have never seen. They pass them out, one to each man. You are handed a lemon. You hold it in your hands, this simple, yellow fruit, and it feels like a holy relic. You do not even bother to peel it. You sink your loose, painful teeth into the rind, and the explosion of sour, acidic juice in your mouth is the most intense, most wonderful sensation of your life. It is a jolt of pure, unadulterated life. It hurts your bleeding gums, but it is a good hurt. It is the feeling of something being cleansed, of a poison being washed away. You watch as men who were on the verge of death suck greedily on lemons and oranges, the juice dribbling down their chins. A strange and little-known fact is how quickly the effects of vitamin C can be felt. While a full recovery takes weeks, the bleeding can stop within 24 hours. The body, starved for this essential nutrient, soaks it up like a sponge. Historians have documented accounts of sailors feeling a tangible shift in their well-being within a single day of consuming citrus. For the first time in months, a genuine, unforced smile spreads across your face. You are not rich. You are not glorious. You are sitting on the deck of a captured ship, in immense space, covered in bruises and filth. But you are alive, and you are holding a lemon. In this moment, you understand the true nature of treasure. It is not gold. It is not silver. It is a simple piece of fruit. You have plundered a ship not for wealth, but for wellness. And as you take another bite, the sour juice stinging your mouth, you know, with absolute certainty, that this is the most valuable prize you will ever take. The citrus fruit works like a miracle, arresting the horrifying advance of the scurvy. Within a few days, the bleeding gums have begun to heal, the dark bruises are starting to fade, and the soul-crushing lethargy is lifting, replaced by a slow, returning tide of strength. The atmosphere on the ship transforms from a floating morgue to a convalescent home. There is still pain and weakness, but now it is mixed with something that has been absent for months. Hope, with the immediate threat of death averted. Your attention can now turn to a more traditional pirate pastime, procuring fresh meat. Your ship, along with your captured merchant prize, is anchored in the calm, turquoise waters of the island's cove. It is a classic Caribbean paradise, a cliché brought to life. The jungle hums with the sound of insects and birds, a stark contrast to the silence of the open ocean. Scouting parties are sent ashore, not just for more fruit and fresh water, but for anything that moves. And on this island, something very large, very slow, and very delicious moves. Sea turtles, specifically green sea turtles. These magnificent, gentle giants were, for pirates and sailors of the era, a godsend. They were the perfect livestock. They could be captured easily when they came ashore to nest on the beaches at night. once flipped onto their backs, they were completely helpless. A single turtle could weigh hundreds of pounds, providing a massive amount of fresh, high-quality meat. But their most valuable attribute was their ability to survive out of water for weeks, even months, if kept dampened in the shade. This made them a self-preserving, noble ladder. A pirate ship could capture a dozen turtles, stir them in the hold, and have a source of fresh meat for the next leg of their journey. One night, you join a hunting party. You row quietly to a secluded beach under a canopy of brilliant stars. You wait in the shadows of the palm trees. You only sound the gentle lapping of the waves. Soon, you see them, huge, dark shapes emerging from the surf, dragging their immense weight across the sand. They move with a slow, ancient grace. It feels almost criminal to disturb them, but the memory of salt junk is still fresh in your mind. The hunters wait for the female turtle to enter her trance-like state while laying her eggs, then rush out. With a coordinated effort, they heave and shove, flipping the massive reptile onto her back. She lies there, her powerful flippers waving uselessly in the air. The captured turtles are ferried back to the ship and laid out on the deck. Silas, the cook, looks upon them with the eye of a master artist who has just been given a fresh canvas. For the next few days, the ship is filled with the smells of actual cooking. The turtle is butchered with surprising skill. Almost no part is wasted. The red meat from the flippers is compared to beef, while the white meat from the breast is said to resemble veal. It is roasted, stewed, then fried. The liver is a prized delicacy, and the green fat, from which the turtle gets its name, is rendered down and used for cooking, imparting a unique, rich flavor. You are served a bowl of turtle stew. It is thick, savory, and filled with tender chunks of meat. After months of hardtack and mahogany, the sensation of eating fresh, properly cooked food is almost overwhelming. It is not just nourishment. It is a restoration of your humanity. The crew feasts. For the first time, you hear genuine laughter. Not the manic cackles of a drunken celebration, but the easy, contented laughter of well-fed men. A lesser-known dish, and one that became a cornerstone of Caribbean cuisine, is turtle soup. But the pirate version was likely a bit more rustic. The most sought-after part was the cauli pea, the cartilaginous part of the lower shell, and the cauli pash from the upper shell. These gelatinous parts were slow-cooked to create a thick, intensely flavorful broth, considered both a delicacy and a restorative tonic. Historians often point to the pirates' and privateers' love of turtle as a key factor in spreading its popularity back to Europe, where it became a feature of lavish banquets. It is a strange thought. The fine dining trend of London and Paris was being set by grizzled, scurvy-ridden pirates in the Caribbean. The exact origin of turtle soup is, of course, debated, but its connection to the sailors who relied on turtles for survival is undeniable. The feast lasts for several days. The captured turtles in the hold ensure that fresh meat will be on the menu for weeks to come. The crew's health and morale are fully restored. They are no longer a band of dying men. They are pirates again, strong, confident, and dangerous. You look at your reflection in a cup of fresh, clean water. The gaunt, bruised face of a scurvy victim is gone, replaced by the tanned, healing face of a survivor. The memory of the plague of the sea will forever haunt you, a terrifying reminder of how close you all came to a miserable end. But for now, your belly is full of turtle meat, your body is flush with vitamin C, and your spirit is renewed. The golden age of piracy, which had seemed like a cruel lie, suddenly feels possible again. You are ready for the hunt. The idyllic interlude on the turtle-filled island feels like a dream. Your body, flooded with vitamins and fresh protein, has healed at an astonishing rate. The crew is revitalized, their swagger returned. The ship feels alive again, a predator back on the prowl. The remaining turtles, stored helplessly on their backs in the hold, promise a few more weeks of decent meals. The captured merchant vessel has been stripped of anything useful: sails, rope, tools, and of course, all its food, and then scuttled, sunk to hide the evidence of your presence. You are pirates once more, and the open sea calls. But the ocean has a short memory. The bounty of the island is finite. The last of the fresh fruit is eaten within a week. The vibrant green of the jungle fades into a distant memory, replaced once again by the endless, monotonous blue of the sea. The shipboard routine, briefly interrupted by the miracle of land, reasserts its grim, grinding rhythm, and with it, the food begins its inevitable decline. The turtle meat, at first a cause for celebration, becomes less of a treat and more of a chore. The first few turtles were butchered and cooked fresh. The later ones, however, have been lying in the hold for weeks. While they are still alive, they are weakened and dehydrated. The meat is tougher, dull. Silas, the cook, does his best, but there is no hiding the fact that you are eating stressed, poor quality meat. The rich, savory stews are replaced by stringy, boiled turtle. It is still infinitely better than salt junk, but the novelty has worn off. It is just rations. Then comes the day the last turtle is butchered. A kind of quiet dread settles over the crew. Everyone knows what is next. The following day, the familiar, pungent smell of boiling brine once again fills the air. Silas has opened a cask of the salt beef. The age of mahogany has returned. Your first meal of the old diet is a shock to the system. After weeks of fresh flavors, the overwhelming saltiness of the beef is an assault on your newly healed palate. The texture, like chewing a salty rope, is even more vile than you remembered. And then, there is the hard tech. You had almost forgotten about the weevils. Your first biscuit back on the old diet provides a stark reintroduction. You wrap it on the table out of habit, and a small shower of black specks tumbles out. The sight fills you with a weary, soul-deep resignation. You are back where you started. The cycle of misery has begun anew. The brief period of good health and high spirits now seems like a cruel tease, a glimpse of a life you cannot have. This boom and bust cycle of nutrition was the defining feature of a pirate's life. It is a point historians often emphasize to counter the romantic narrative. A pirate's diet was not consistently terrible. It was inconsistently good. There were brief periods of feasting and abundance after a successful raid or a landfall, followed by long, grim stretches of near starvation and nutritional deficiency. This dietary whiplash, swinging from turtle stew and fresh fruit to weevils and salt junk, likely had a profound psychological impact. It created a desperate, feast or famine mentality. A lesser-known aspect of this cycle was the scouring of the hold. Before taking on fresh provisions, the crew had to clean out the old ones. This often meant confronting the dregs of their supplies. You might be tasked with shoveling out spoiled, moldy biscuit crumbs that were little more than insect-infested dust. You might have to help dump a cask of pork that had gone completely putrid. The meat a slimy, green-black sludge that smelled so foul it made even the most hardened sailor gag. It was a visceral reminder of how close to the edge you always were, how a few weeks of bad luck could turn your food supply into a toxic liability. The debate among scholars is whether this cycle made pirates more or less risk-averse. Did the memory of scurvy and starvation make them more cautious, or did the desperation for fresh food drive them to take ever greater risks? Attacking ships, they were in no condition to fight, simply on the rumor of a full larder. The evidence seems to suggest the latter. Food, not gold, was often the primary motivator for their most reckless actions. You are living that desperation now. The memory of the turtle feast makes the current reality of salt beef taste even more bitter. The men grow sullen and quiet again. The easy laughter is gone, replaced by grumbling and arguments over small things. A perceived extra sip of grog, a slightly larger piece of meat. The unity forged in the scurvy crisis phrase and unravels. The brotherhood is a fair-weather friendship, and the forecast is bleak. You stand your watch, chewing on a piece of soggy, weevil-filled hardtack, and stare at the empty horizon. The island, with its life-giving fruit and turtles, is a paradise lost. You are once again trapped in the monotonous, floating prison of the ship, sustained by the nutritional equivalent of sawdust and brine. The dream of freedom feels like a mockery when your daily existence is this grim. The only thing that keeps you going is the knowledge that the cycle can turn again. Another ship, another island, could be just over the horizon. It has to be, because you know, with a certainty that chills you to the bone, that you cannot survive another 6 months of this. The hunt must continue, not for glory, but for dinner. The weeks drag on, and the diet of salt junk and hardtack grinds away at both body and spirit. The brief memory of fresh food has made the current reality almost unbearable. The mood on the ship is souring, and the provisions are dwindling faster than anyone would like to admit. It is in this atmosphere of quiet desperation that you become aware of another, unofficial, source of protein on the ship, a source that has been living alongside you and under you the entire time. Rats. Ships have always been magnets for rats. They are the ultimate stowaways, scurrying aboard via mooring ropes in port, hiding amongst the cargo, and breeding at an astonishing rate in the dark, warm confines of the hold. On your pirate ship, they are a constant, scurrying presence. You hear their scratching and squeaking in the walls at night. You see their dark, fleeting shapes darting across the deck in the moonlight. For most of the voyage, they are considered a pest, a nuisance to be cursed at and occasionally stamped on. They chew through ropes, gnaw into sacks of flour, and contaminate what little you have. But as the official rations shrink, the crew's perception of the rats begins to shift. They are no longer just vermin. They are meat. The hunting of ship's rats was a grim necessity born of hunger. It was not an everyday occurrence, but an accepted practice when food was scarce. The methods were as crude and desperate as the act itself. Some men would set simple traps, while others, more actively, would go hunting in the hold with a club or a belaying pin. It was a filthy, dangerous business. The ship's hold was a labyrinth of barrels, crates, and coiled ropes, pitch black and slick with bilge water. A hunter could easily twist an ankle or take a fall in the dark, and the rats themselves were not passive victims. They were large, bold, and would bite viciously if cornered. One evening, you see a couple of sailors emerge from the hold, looking grimy but triumphant. They are holding up a string of freshly killed rats by their tails. They take them to Silas, the cook, who accepts them with a weary nod, as if he were being handed a string of sausages. There is no ceremony, no disgust. This is simply what is done. Silas prepares them with the same practicality he applies to everything else. The rats are skinned, gutted, and typically either roasted over the coals on a skewer or thrown into the communals to pot along with the salt beef and whatever else is being served. Adding them to the stew, the skill agoli, was the preferred method. It disguised the meat, blending it in with the other, more familiar, if equally unappetizing, flavors. A man could eat his dinner and, if he did not think about it too hard, could pretend he was not eating rodent. A little known but grimly fascinating detail is that some sailors became connoisseurs of ship's rats. An old sea saying claimed that a bilge rat is fuller and a bread rat is sweeter. They believed that rats caught near the bilge, feeding on greasy waste, were plump and fatty, while those caught near the biscuit stores had a cleaner, more pleasant taste. Whether this is true or a piece of gallows humor is a matter for historical debate, but it shows the degree to which this desperate act was normalized. They were not just eating rats, they were grading them. The question of disease was, of course, a huge risk, though the sailors may not have understood the germ theory behind it. Rats are carriers of a host of diseases, most famously the bubonic plague, while large-scale plague outbreaks from eating rats were not a common feature of pirate life. Lesser infections, parasites, and general food poisoning were a constant danger. But for a crew staring down the barrel of starvation, the immediate threat of an empty stomach outweighed the potential future threat of a rat-borne illness. It was a calculated risk, another of the many gambles they took every day. You are served your bolus to that night. It is the same grayish-brown swap as always, but this time, you know what might be lurking in it. You see a small, unit and fightable piece of meat on your spoon. Is it a stringy piece of the salt beef, or is it something else? You hesitate for a moment. The men around you are eating without a word, their faces grim, To refuse would be to show weakness, to insult the cook, and, most importantly, to go hungry. You close your eyes, swallow, and try not to think about it. The taste is inconclusive. It is salty, greasy, and vaguely meaty. It is just stew. This is a new low. Eating weevils was a matter of passive acceptance. Eating rats is an act of active desperation. It is a clear sign that the ship is in trouble. The bravado and the dreams of gold seem a million miles away. Your reality has been stripped down to its most basic, animalistic level. You are hunting and eating the vermin that infest your floating hull, just to see the next sunrise. You are no longer just a pirate. You are a survivor. And you are part of the ship's food chain in a way you never, ever wanted to be. The horizon needs to produce a prize, and it needs to do it soon, because you are not sure how much longer you can stomach this. The consumption of rats was a symptom of a deeper problem. The food supplies are now critically low. The quartermaster, his face etched with worry, announces a cut in rations. The daily allotment of hardtack is reduced from 1 biscuit to half a biscuit. The scoop of skill Agalistu is noticeably smaller. The grog is watered down even further, becoming little more than rum-flavored slime. This is the moment when the thin veneer of pirate brotherhood begins to crack under the strain of genuine hunger. Hunger changes men. It sharpens their edges, erodes their patience, and magnifies their grievances. The low-level grumbling that has been a constant soundtrack to the voyage now escalates into open hostility. Every man becomes a jealous guardian of his meager portion. You see men staring intently as the quartermaster doles out the food, their eyes narrowed, convinced that the man next to them received a slightly larger piece of beef, a few more crumbs of biscuit. Trust, the essential glue of a pirate crew, dissolves in the acid of suspicion. A fight breaks out over nothing. Eamon accuses his messmate of taking a sip of his grog ration while his back was turned. In a flash, knives are drawn. Just a few weeks ago, these men were laughing together, feasting on turtle. Now, they are ready to kill each other over a mouthful of diluted rum. The fight is broken up quickly by the boatswain, but the incident leaves a dark, ugly stain on the atmosphere. The ship is no longer a band of brothers. It is a cage of hungry, irritable animals. You witness the desperation firsthand. You see a man, a hardened pirate who once charged a Spanish deck without flinching, secretly licking the inside of the emptiest cauldron, hoping to get a single extra calorie of greasy residue. You see another attempting to trade his share of a future prize, a fortune that may never exist, for someone else's biscuit ration tonight. The future has become meaningless. All that matters is the gnawing emptiness in the stomach right now. This is where the pirate code, the famous articles that govern life on board, is put to its ultimate test. These articles often included strict rules about rationing. Every man was entitled to an equal share of provisions. This was a core principle of the pirate democracy, a direct rejection of the hierarchies of the Royal Navy, where officers dined well while the crew starved. But what happens when an equal share is not enough to live on? Historians still debate how well these democratic principles held up under extreme duress. Accounts from the time are often contradictory. Some stories tell of crews sharing their last drops of water with remarkable fairness and discipline. Others describe a complete breakdown of order, with the strongest hoarding what little was left, and the pirate code being abandoned in favor of the law of the jungle. The reality was likely somewhere in between, varying from ship to ship, crew to crew, depending on the leadership of the captain and quartermaster. The lesser known, and rather pathetic, aspect of the starvation was the theft of non-food items. As hunger gnaws, men start to eye things that were previously inedible. A man's leather belt, his shoes, or the small tallow candles used for light suddenly look potentially edible. A story circulates of a man whose leather pouch, used to carry his flint and steel, went missing. He later found it being secretly chewed on by another sailor in a dark corner of the ship. The man trying to soften the tough, turned hide into something he could swallow. It is a pitiful, desperate act, stealing something worthless in the hopes of tricking your stomach into feeling full. You learn to guard your own meager possessions. Your half biscuit is no longer just food. It is your most valuable treasure. You do not eat it all at once. You nibble it slowly throughout the day, trying to make the sensation of eating last as long as possible. You hide it in your sea chest, constantly worried that someone might steal it. The paranoia is as exhausting as the hunger itself. You find yourself staring at your own leather boots, the thought crossing your mind for the first time. Could you boil them? What would they taste like? You push the thought away, disgusted with yourself, but the idea lingers. Hunger is a corrupting force. It makes you contemplate things you never thought possible. The ship plows onward through the endless blue, but it feels like it is going nowhere. The lookout scans the horizon not with hope, but with a kind of grim obligation. The hunt for a prize is no longer a quest for riches, but a frantic, desperate search for a floating pantry. Every man on board knows that if they do not find a ship to plunder in the next few days, the knives will come out again. And this time, it will not be over a sip of grog. It will be for the last biscuit, the last piece of salty, rotten meat. The battle for survival has turned inward. Your greatest enemy is no longer a Spanish galleon or a naval frigate. It is the man sleeping in the hammock next to you. In this bleak landscape of hunger and mistrust, any small comfort becomes a luxury of unimaginable proportions. While you and the rest of the crew are subsisting on diluted grog, you become aware of a different, more aromatic beverage being consumed in the captain's cabin. You catch a whiff of it one afternoon as you pass by his open door. The lurid, sweet, spicy scent that is utterly alien to the sour, salty air of the main deck. It is the smell of nutmeg and sugar. The captain is drinking Bumbo O. Bumbo O was the aristocrat of pirate drinks, a significant upgrade from the crude, functional grog served to the crew, while grog was a simple mix of rum and water. Bumbo O was a proper cocktail. The recipe varied, but it typically involved rum, water, sugar, and a generous grating of nutmeg or cinnamon. It was essentially a warm, spiced rum punch on a ship where the only flavors were salt and draught. Bumbo O was the absolute pinnacle of culinary indulgence. The ingredients for Bumbo O were themselves treasures. Rum was common enough, but sugar was a valuable commodity. It was part of the cargo on many merchant ships, shipped in large, conical loaves, and was a prime target during a raid. To be able to use sugar to sweeten a drink, rather than hoard it as a high-energy food source, was a sign of incredible prosperity. But the real luxury was the nutmeg. Nutmeg and its sister spice mace came from a tiny cluster of islands in Indonesia, the so-called Spice Islands. In the 17th and 18th centuries, the trade was fiercely controlled by the Dutch, making nutmeg worth more than its weight in gold in Europe. It was coveted for its flavor, its supposed medicinal properties, and its status as an exotic luxury. For a pirate captain to have a personal stash of nutmeg was like having a private bank account. It was a symbol of his success, his personal plunder that was not subject to the crew's equal share system. This brings up a fascinating and often debated point among historians. How equal was the pirate brotherhood? Really, the articles guaranteed an equal share of the prize money and provisions. But what about the personal luxuries plundered? The captain, by virtue of his position, often had first pick of the non-monetary loot from a captured vessel. A fine coat, a silver snuff box, a cask of fine wine, or a bag of precious spices. While the crew was fighting over stale biscuits, the captain could be enjoying a level of comfort that was worlds away from their reality. This did not necessarily violate the letter of the pirate code, but it certainly strained its spirit. The existence of Bumbo O is a perfect example of this subtle, unspoken hierarchy. You watch the captain emerge from his cabin, a silver tankard in his hand, the sweet smell of Bumbo O trailing behind him. He looks better fed, less haunted than the rest of the crew. His special drink is not just a comfort. It is a source of calories and morale that is denied to everyone else. You feel a surge of resentment, a feeling you see reflected in the eyes of the other men who catch the scent. It is a stark, aromatic reminder that even in this supposed democracy of thieves, Some are still more equal than others. The existence of a captain's privilege like Bumbo is a little-known detail that complicates the simple narrative of pirate equality. While a captain could be voted out for being cruel or incompetent, he was often afforded small luxuries as a mark of his station. This was a delicate balance. As long as the ship was successful and the men were fed, they would tolerate the captain's Bumbo. But on a starving ship, the smell of nutmeg and sugar wafting from the great cabin could be the spark that ignites a mutiny. It is no longer a symbol of his success. It is a symbol of his detachment from their suffering. You find yourself fantasizing about the taste of it. You try to imagine the warmth of the rum, the sweetness of the sugar, the complex, fragrant spice. It is a sensory experience so far removed from your daily reality that it feels like something from a dream. The bland, soggy hardtack and the salty, stringy beef are all you know. The thought that someone just a few feet away is enjoying such a profound pleasure is a form of psychological torture. As the days wear on and the hunger deepens, the sweet smell of the captain's Bumbo becomes an emblem of everything you resent. It is the smell of inequality, of comfort in the face of your misery. It is the scent of a promise broken. You and your shipmates are in this together, facing starvation as a crew. But the captain, with his private stash of spices, is just a little less in it than everyone else. You chew on your flavorless biscuit, the phantom taste of nutmeg haunting your senses, and you understand that even on a ship of outlaws, there is still a class system, and you are at the bottom of it. Just when you think the situation cannot get any more miserable, the sky turns a malevolent shade of bruised purple-gray, and the sea begins to heave. A storm is coming, and with the storm comes a fresh, new hell for everyone on board, but especially for Silas, the one-legged cook, and his precarious kitchen. Cooking on a ship is a challenge on a calm day. In a storm, it is a death-defying act of extreme culinary arts. The galley, already a cramped and smoky fire hazard, becomes a scene of pure chaos. The ship is no longer just rolling. It is pitching and yawing violently, slamming into mountainous waves that send shudders through its entire frame. Down in the galley, every object that is not bolted down becomes a potential projectile. The gimbal-led stove, a marvel of engineering designed to keep the firebox level, is put to its ultimate test. It swings wildly in its iron cradle, looking like a demonic censer. Despite its design, hot coals and embers are frequently jolted out, skittering across the wet floorboards, each one a potential spark that could ignite the ship. The cook's mate, a boy of no more than 14, spends most of his time darting about with a bucket of sand, frantically extinguishing these little fires before they can spread. The main cauldron, filled with the day's meal of boiling salt water and the few sad-looking chunks of beef, sloshes violently, superheated. Greasy water splashes over the rim, scalding anything it touches. The air becomes a thick, choking mixture of smoke, steam, and the foul smell of bilge water being churned up from the depths of the ship. Silas, braced against a bulkhead, his peg leg wedged into a notch in the floorboards to keep his balance, tries to stir the pot with a long ladle, his face a mask of intense concentration. He looks less like a cook and more like a wizard trying to contain a malevolent potion. You get a glimpse of this pandemonium while taking shelter from the driving rain. The hatch to the galley is open for a moment, and you see the scene silhouetted against the firelight. Silas loses his footing as the ship lurches, and he stumbles against the hot stove, letting out a sharp cry of pain. A skillet full of dandy funks, those greasy, fried hardtack cakes, slides off the hearth and clatters across the floor, its precious cargo scattered into the grime and sand. The cook's mate scrambles to pick them up. On a starving ship, even floor food is still food. This chaotic scene is a historical reality that is often overlooked. The sheer physical danger of the ship's galley was immense. Cooks had one of the highest rates of injury on board, from severe burns and scalds to broken bones from being thrown about in rough seas. A little-known fact is that many ship's galleys were designed with a high lip or fiddle around the stovetop, a small wooden barrier to try and prevent pots from sliding off. But in a true hurricane-force storm, These small measures were laughably inadequate. Historians who study the daily life of sailors often marvel that any cooking was attempted at all in such conditions. In truly severe weather, the fires would be extinguished for safety, and the crew would have to subsist on cold rations. Raw hard-tack and a swig of rum. This was known as a banyan day, the term borrowed from the Navy for meatless days. But on a pirate ship in a storm, it meant a no-cook day. This was often a relief for the cook, but a misery for the crew, for whom a hot, if disgusting, meal was the only comfort in a cold, wet world. The debate is not whether it was dangerous, but how cooks adapted. They developed specialized techniques, like using nets to secure pots over the fire, or lashing themselves to the wall to keep their hands free. Silas's method of wedging his peg leg into the floor is a perfect example of this kind of desperate, on-the-job innovation. He is a master of a very specific, very dangerous environment. The storm rages for 2 days. Sleep is impossible. The groaning of the ship's timbers is constant. A sound you feel in your teeth. You are cold, wet, and perpetually hungry, huddling with the other men in the cramped, dark forecastle. But every few hours, the cook's mate, drenched and exhausted, will appear with a bucket of the hot, thin, salty broth. It is barely food, but it is warm. It is a small, defiant act of civilization in the face of nature's fury. Silas, down in his fiery, chaotic hell, is still doing his job. He is fighting the storm with his cauldron and ladle. When the storm finally breaks, the ship is battered but intact. The crew emerges onto the deck, blinking in the pale, watery sunlight. The galley is a wreck. The floor is covered in a slurry of soot, sand, and spilled food. Silas is slumped against the wall, his face pale with exhaustion, a fresh burn mark on his arm. But sitting on the stove is a pot of his infamous skill ogoli. It is a pathetic-looking meal, but to you, it is a triumph. It is a symbol of survival. The ship survived the storm, and thanks to the incredible, dangerous work of the one-legged cook, you have a hot breakfast. You take your ration with a new sense of respect. You may complain about Silas's cooking, but you will never again doubt his courage. The storm has passed, leaving behind a battered ship and a hungry crew. The desperation, temporarily forgotten in the fight for survival against the waves, returns with a vengeance as you sit gnawing on your damp, half ration of hardtack. A simple, almost childishly obvious question pops into your head. You turn to one of the older, more experienced pirates, a man named Chum, and ask why you do not fish. You say that you are surrounded by water and there must be fish in it. Chum looks at you with an expression that is half pity, half amusement, as if you have just asked why you cannot all just flap your arms and fly to shore. The eternal question of the landlubber, he says, his voice raspy. He then proceeds to give you a long, weary lesson in the frustrating realities of oceanic fishing. His first point is about location. You see land, he asks, gesturing to the unbroken, 360-degree horizon of blue. No, neither do the fish, while coastal waters and areas around reefs are teeming with life. The deep, open ocean, the blue desert, is surprisingly barren. Fish populations are concentrated in specific areas, often far from the common shipping lanes you are trying to patrol. You could trail a line for days, even weeks, in the middle of the Atlantic or Pacific and catch absolutely nothing. It is like setting up a hunting blind in the middle of a vast, empty plain and hoping a deer just happens to wander by. His second point is about equipment. The ship is equipped with some basic fishing gear, a few heavy lines, some large, crude iron hooks. This is not for sport. It is for opportunity. If you happen to sail through a school of tuna or spotted dorado, you are ready. But this gear is heavy and unwieldy, designed for catching large, powerful fish, not for a casual afternoon of angling. You do not have the delicate rods, the variety of lures, or the fine nets needed for consistent success. You have the equivalent of an elephant gun to hunt for rabbits. Then, there's the problem of bait. What would you use? A chunk of the precious, heavily salted beef. Most fish would turn their noses up at the rock-hard, brine-soaked mahogany, a piece of weevil-infested biscuit, unlikely to tempt anything with gills. Sometimes, sailors would use strips of white cloth to act as a lure, or a piece of shiny metal, but these were long shots at best. The most effective bait was often a piece of a previously caught fish, which brings you back to the original problem. A little-known aspect of shipboard fishing was the targeting of a specific creature, the shark. Sharks were one of the few large predators that would consistently follow ships for long distances, drawn by the trail of garbage and waste thrown overboard. Sailors had a complicated relationship with them. They were seen as evil, malevolent spirits, the sea dogs who waited for men to fall overboard. Killing them was considered both sport and a form of vengeance. Shark meat, however, was not highly prized. It was tough, coarse, and had a strong, unpleasant ammonia-like taste if not prepared correctly by soaking it in salt water. It was food for the truly desperate, but it was a more reliable catch than most other fish. The debate among food historians is whether shark was a regular part of the diet or a last resort food, eaten only when the salt beef ran out. The consensus leans toward the latter. Jem tells you a story about his first voyage. The young, naive sailor, much like yourself, had managed to catch a beautiful, brightly colored fish. The crew was ecstatic, thinking it a gift from God. The cook fried it up, and everyone had a small piece. Within hours, the entire crew was violently ill, suffering from hallucinations, vomiting, and a bizarre, terrifying symptom where hot things felt cold and cold things felt hot. They had eaten a fish that had chiguadar, a poisoning, a toxin accumulated by reef fish that is odorless, tasteless, and not destroyed by cooking. Several men died. The story is a grim reminder that even a successful catch could be a death sentence. The ocean is full of beautiful, deadly traps. So, while the idea of a ship sustaining itself on fishing seems logical to a mind raised on land, the reality was that it was an unreliable, often fruitless, and occasionally dangerous gamble. Fishing was a supplement, a welcome bonus, but it could never replace the core provisions of biscuit and salted meat. It was a lottery, not a larder. You look out at the vast, shimmering expanse of the ocean with new eyes. It is no longer a potential buffet. It is a desert, beautiful, but empty. You understand now why the old sailors do not talk about fishing. It is a false hope, a distraction from the real task at hand, finding and capturing another ship. That is your true fishing ground. The ships that cross these waters are the lumbering, predictable prey you are equipped to hunt, and their holds, filled with the labor of others, are the only reliable source of food out here. Your dinner will not be pulled from the water on a hook. It will be taken from another man's storeroom at the point of a sword. The failure of fishing as a viable food source solidifies a grim reality. You are trapped, not just on the ship, but inside a bubble of ever-present, inescapable stench. With the failure of every potential distraction, your senses are forced to turn inward, to focus on the immediate, suffocating reality of your environment. And that reality is dominated by smell. The ship has developed its own unique, complex, and profoundly foul atmosphere. It is a scent you breathe in with every waking moment, a scent that clings to your clothes, your hair, in the back of your throat. It is the first thing you notice when you waken, the last thing you taste before you fall into a fitful sleep. It has become the smell of your life. It is a rich and layered bouquet of decay. The top note, sharp and acrid, is the ever-present smell of tar. The ropes of the rigging are coated in it. The seams of the deck are sealed with it. On a hot day, it melts slightly, releasing its pungent, chemical odor into the air. It is a clean smell, a purposeful smell, but it is overpowering. Beneath the tar is the deep, bass note of the bilge. The bilge is the lowest part of the ship's hull, the dark, inaccessible space where all the foul liquids of the vessel eventually collect. It is a stagnant soup of seawater that has seeped through the planks, mixed with spilldrum, rancid grease from the galley, vomit from seasick sailors, and the urine and waste that has missed its mark. It is, quite literally, the ship's sewer. The smell that wafts up from the bilge pumps is a gag-inducing miasma of pure rot. a concentrated essence of filth that can fell a grown man. Layered on top of this foundation are the smells of life and death. There is the sour, stale odor of unwashed bodies. Bathing is not a priority on a pirate ship. Fresh water is too precious to be wasted on hygiene. Men wear the same clothes for weeks, even months, until they practically rot off their bodies. The forecastle, where the crew sleeps in a tightly packed mass of hammocks, has a thick, animalistic effigy of sweat, bad breath, and damp wool. Then there is the smell of the food itself, which is almost worse than the body odor. The galley emits a constant plume of greasy, smoky air that smells of boiling salt and old fat. The salt beef, even when cooked, retains its pungent, briny funk. The hard deck, stored in its sacks, contributes a dusty, musty odor of old flour and the faint, peppery scent of weevil droppings. When a cask of meat has gone bad or a sack of biscuit is found to be a teeming mass of molten maggots, the stench of its disposal can contaminate the entire ship for days. A little-known but powerful contributor to the ship's smell profile was the livestock. When turtles, chickens, or goat were kept on board, they added their own farmyard aromas to the mix. While their presence promised fresh food, it also meant the deck was often slick with their droppings, adding a pungent, ammonia-rich note to the symphony of smells. Historians who study shipboard life often use the term olfactory landscape to describe this environment. They argue that for a sailor, these smells were not just unpleasant, they were information. The smell of the bilge could warn of a serious leak. A change in the smell of the hold could indicate that provisions were spoiling. The debate is how much this constant, stressful sensory input contributed to the infamous irritability and aggression of sailors. Were they angry because of their rough lives? Or were they just driven half mad by the smell? You find that you can no longer escape it. Even the sea breeze offers no relief, as it seems to just pick up the ship's personal cloud of stink and blow it back in your face. There is no corner of the vessel that isn't touched by it. You see a new sailor, a man taken from a captured merchant ship, reaching over the side. He is not seasick. He is simply overwhelmed by the wall of odor that is now his new reality. You remember feeling the same way on your first day. Now, you have become accustomed to it, which is somehow even more horrifying. You have accepted this as normal. This acclimatization is a survival mechanism, but it comes at a cost. Your sense of smell, one of the primary senses for enjoying food, is blunted, beaten into submission. It is a small mercy. Perhaps, if you could truly smell the rot in the water and the rancid fat in the meat, you would never be able to eat. The stench is both the problem and the solution, a constant affliction that mercifully numbs you to its own worst effects. You live and breathe and eat in a cloud of your own filth. The grand, romantic adventure of piracy has been reduced to this, just trying to find a breath of fresh air, and on this ship, in the middle of this ocean, there is none to be found. Your senses, now dulled to the general, overwhelming stench of the ship, have become attuned to finer, more specific horrors. You have made your peace with the weevils in the hardtack. They are an expected, if unwelcome, dinner guest. But as the voyage drags on and the last of the good provisions are used up, you begin to discover that the ship is home to a much wider and more disgusting array of crawling, wriggling life. You are not just on a pirate ship. You are the unwitting captain of a floating, mobile ecosystem of pests. The discovery begins with the cheese. On rare occasions, a reel of cheese, captured from a prize, is brought out as a special treat. It is hard, dry, and incredibly salty, more like a block of wax than a dairy product, but it is a change from the usual fare. As you are given your small chunk, you notice that the surface is crawling with what looks like a fine, pale dust. On closer inspection, you see that the dust is moving. It is a seething, microscopic carpet of cheese mites. These tiny arachnids thrive on the proteins and fats of aging cheese. The older sailors are completely unfazed. Just scrape them off, one advises, using his knife to skim the top layer of mites away before popping the cheese in his mouth. Another man does not even bother, chewing his portion thoughtfully. adds a bit of a tang. He declares, you learn that some cheese connoisseurs, even on land, considered a healthy mite population a sign of a well-aged cheese. But a healthy population and the writhing, living rind you are looking at seem to be two very different things. Next on the two of horrors is the flour. On a ship with a proper baker's oven, a rarity, but not unheard of. The cook might occasionally try to bake fresh bread. More often, the flour is used to thicken stews. One day, you see Silas the cook sifting the flour through a piece of coarse cloth. You look into the barrel he is taking it from. It is not the pure white powder you would expect. It is crawling with the larvae and pupae of the Mediterranean flour moth, the same creature that gives you the bargeman maggots in your hardtack. The flour is a wriggling, web-filled nursery. Silas just sighs and continues his sifting, separating the insects from their food source. Nothing is wasted. The sifted out larvae are often fried up as a crunchy, protein-rich snack. This is a lesser-known reality of food storage in the age of sail. It was not just about spoilage from mold and damp. It was a constant battle against a multi-front invasion of pests. Historians who examine the victualling records of old naval ships often find complaints about entire shipments of food being devoured by the worm. The term worm was a catch-all for any number of insect larvae. The academic question is not whether this infestation happened, but what the nutritional consequences were. Some argue, perhaps half-jokingly, that the insects provided a crucial source of vitamins and protein that was otherwise missing from the diet. Others contend that the pests, and their waste, introduced new toxins and diseases, making the food even less healthy. But the infestation is not limited to the food stores. The entire ship is a haven. Cockroaches, large and bold, are everywhere. They scurry from the damp timbers at night, exploring every nook and cranny. You wake up sometimes to find one crawling on your face. There is no escaping them. Then there are the bed bugs and lice, which infest the hammocks and clothing of the crew, passing from man to man in the cramped quarters. The constant itching is a low-grade torment that can drive a man mad. You feel as though you are living inside a natural history museum, but one where all the exhibits have escaped their enclosures. Your biscuit has weevils, your cheese has mites, your flour has moths, your bed has bugs, your clothes have lice. Every aspect of your existence is shared with some form of skittering, six-legged freeloader. You look down at the piece of mite-covered cheese in your hand. The old pirate's advice to scrape him off echoes in your head. You take your knife and do as he said, shaving off the thickest layer of the living dust. You take a hesitant bite of the cheese beneath. It is salty and sharp, and the tang the other sailor mentioned is definitely there. A faint, ammonia-like flavor from the mite residue. It is not good, but it is a flavor. Any flavor is a welcome change from the nothingness of hardtack. You are no longer just a man on a ship. You are a habitat. You are the custodian of a complex food web. A walking, talking ecosystem. The romantic vision of the pirate as a lone wolf, a master of his own destiny, is a joke. You are not even the master of your own dinner. Your food comes with its own food, and you are all in this together. The thought is so absurd, so profoundly disgusting, that you can only laugh. You sit there, on the deck of a filthy ship, surrounded by vermin, eating mite-infested cheese, and you laugh. It is either that, or scream. The physical hardships, the hunger, the filth, the infestations, are relentless. But as the weeks turn into months with no sign of a prize, a different kind of decay sets in. This one is silent and internal. It is the slow, grinding erosion of your spirit. The monotony of the diet and the routine is beginning to exact a heavy psychological toll. Every day is a perfect, depressing copy of the one before it. You wake to the same clang of the bell. You eat the same soggy hardtack for breakfast. You perform the same laborious tasks, scrubbing the same patch of deck, coiling the same ropes, staring at the same empty horizon. The sea itself, which once seemed like a symbol of infinite possibility, has become a featureless, blue prison. The sun rises, beats down mercilessly, and sets. The moon rises, casts a cold, indifferent light on the water, and sets. Nothing changes. The food, or lack thereof, is the central pillar of this mental torment. Your entire existence revolves around the twice daily ritual of consuming something you despise. There is no joy in it, no comfort, no satisfaction. It is a biological chore, like breathing or sleeping, but one that is actively unpleasant. Your brain, starved for new sensory input, begins to play tricks on you. You have vivid, detailed dreams about food, not grand feasts, but simple things. You dream of a loaf of fresh, warm bread, the crust crackling as you break it. You dream of a crisp, cold apple, the snap of the first bite, the sweet juice flooding your mouth. You wake up with the ghost of these flavors on your tongue, and the reality of your weevil biscuit is a crushing disappointment that sours the start of every day. This phenomenon, the intense food fantasies of the starved, is well documented, but historians still debate the full extent of its impact on the sailor's mental state. Did it simply make them miserable, or did it actively contribute to a form of madness? Some accounts from the period describe sailors who became obsessed, talking to themselves for hours about remembered meals, their ramblings becoming more and more divorced from reality. Was this a coping mechanism, or a sign of a mind unraveling? You see this unraveling in the men around you. The initial anger and frustration have faded, replaced by a kind of dull, vacant apathy. Men sit for hours, staring into space, their faces slack. The sea shanties and storytelling sessions that once passed the time have died out. There is nothing left to say. The only sounds are the groaning of the ship and the weary sighs of the crew. Your soul feels like it is being bleached, all the color and flavor of life slowly draining away, leaving behind something as dry, hard, and lifeless as a piece of hardtack. You find yourself developing strange, small rituals to break the monotony. You start to save a tiny corner of your biscuit, tucking it away to eat just before you sleep, just to have something to look forward to. You try to identify the individual weevils, giving them names, creating tiny narratives for them before you eat them. It is a pathetic attempt to impose some meaning, some story, onto the sheer, grinding pointlessness of it all. A particularly insidious aspect of this psychological decline is the loss of a future. When you first signed on, your head was full of tomorrows, the next prize, the next port, the eventual fortune you would make. Now, tomorrow is just a repetition of today. The future has collapsed into an endless, repeating present. This is the essence of despair, not the presence of suffering, but the absence of hope. You feel your own personality changing. You were once quick to laugh, to share a story. Now you find yourself becoming sullen, quiet, and suspicious. You hold your energy, your words, your emotions. You are withdrawing into yourself, creating a small, hard shell to protect what little is left of your spirit. You feel yourself becoming one of them, the grim, vacant-eyed sailors you pitied when you first came aboard. The physical body and the mind are inextricably linked. Your brain is being starved of nutrients, of glucose, of the simple fats and vitamins it needs to function properly. The depression and apathy you feel are not just a reaction to your circumstances. They are a physiological symptom of malnutrition. Your mind is literally eating itself. You look at your hands, calloused and grimy, and they do not quite feel like your own. You feel a sense of detachment, of watching your life from a great distance. This is the final stage of the dietary horror, when the food has not only failed to nourish your body, but has begun to actively poison your soul. You are not just starving for food. You are starving for a single, new experience. You are starving for a sign that this will not last forever. The apathy that has gripped the crew is shattered by a single, terrifying announcement from the quartermaster. He stands before the assembled men, his face grim, and holds up an empty barrel stave. The last cask of beef is empty, he says, his voice flat. Then, he holds up a canvas sack, turns it inside out, and a finest of biscuit crumbs and weevil droppings falls to the deck, and the last of the biscuit is gone. The profound, chilling silence falls over the ship. It is a silence deeper and more terrible than the quiet of monotony. This is the silence of true, existential dread. For months, you have been living on the edge of starvation. sustained by meager, disgusting rations. But there was always something. Now, there is nothing. The buffer between you and utter famine has disappeared. The ship's hold, once a repository of provisions, is now a hollow, echoing chamber. The rats, having lost their primary food source in the biscuit stores, have become bolder and more desperate, or have begun to die off themselves. The finality of the situation is absolute. There are no more secret stashes, no more reserves. The grog ration, now mostly foul water with a whisper of rum, is all that is left. You are officially out of food. The crew's reaction is not one of anger or panic, but of a strange, stunned stillness. The energy for rage has long since been expended. What is left is a cold, quiet fear. Men look at each other, their eyes wide, and wonder what to do now. The captain and quartermaster confer in low, urgent tones. The ship's course is altered. They are no longer hunting for prizes. The pretense of being predators is dropped. You are now officially designated as in distress. Your only hope is to find another vessel, any vessel, and beg for sustenance, or to stumble upon a mercifully close and fertile island. The odds of either happening in the vast emptiness of the ocean are terrifyingly slim. The first day without food is strange. Your body, accustomed to the twice daily insult of hardtack and salt junk, feels confused. The hunger pangs are sharp and insistent. You drink your watery grog, but it does nothing to fill the aching void in your stomach. The second day, the hunger evolves. It becomes a dull, constant, burning ache. Your thoughts become fuzzy, your movements slow and deliberate. Every action is calculated to conserve energy. A little known and brutal reality of starvation at sea was the weaker wind's paradox. The strongest, most muscular men on the ship, the ones who were the best fighters and sailors, had a higher metabolism. Their bodies burned through their fattened muscle reserves much faster. The smaller, less searon men, ironically, often lasted longer. Historians studying accounts of shipwrecks and famished crews have noted this grim pattern. Your physical prowess, once your greatest asset, becomes your biggest liability. The social structure of the ship, already frayed, begins to completely disintegrate. The mess groups dissolve. There is no food to share, so there is no reason to gather. Men isolate themselves, each one trapped in his own private bubble of suffering. The hierarchy of captain, quartermaster, and crew becomes meaningless. Starvation is the great equalizer. The captain, with his empty bumboat anchored, is just as hungry as the lowest cabin boy. You find yourself doing things you could not have imagined. You catch yourself chewing on a loose thread from your sleeve, just for the sensation of having something in your mouth. You see another man trying to scrape the last, greasy remnants from the inside of a discarded beef cask. His fingers raw. The ship transforms into a vessel of ghosts, silent figures shuffling across the deck, their eyes sunken, their cheekbones sharp. The sun beats down. The ship rocks gently on the waves. The world outside is calm and beautiful. The cruel mockery of the internal agony of the crew. Time loses all meaning. Is it the third day? The fourth? You lose track. Your world has shrunk to the confines of your own body, to the single, overwhelming sensation of a gnawing, all-consuming emptiness. The debate among maritime historians is a grim one. At what point did a crew's discipline completely break? How many days without food before the articles were forgotten and the law of the sea was replaced by the law of the wild? There is no single answer, but everyone on board knows that a line is approaching, a line of desperation from which there is no return. The last of the hope drains away, leaving only the raw, animal instinct to survive. The veneer of civilization is being stripped away, layer by layer, by the relentless tower of hunger. You look at your fellow pirates, at these men who were once your brothers, and you see them in a new, terrifying light. They are no longer your crewmates. They are just bodies, collections of skin and bone and muscle, and you are one of them. The final food source has been depleted, and the ship is adrift on a sea of despair. The worst is yet to come. The gnawing emptiness has become a physical presence, a hollow demon residing in your gut, your mind. desperate for any solution, starts to fixate on the inedible. The ship, which just a week ago seemed stripped of all sustenance, now appears to be a smorgasbord of desperate possibilities. Your gaze lingers on the leather. There is the captain's fine boots, the thick straps of the cannon rigging, the knife sheaths on every man's belt, and, of course, your own worn-out shoes. The idea, which you once dismissed as a disgusting fantasy, now seems like a logical, even hopeful, course of action. It is a well-documented survival tactic of starving sailors and soldiers throughout history. When all else is gone, you eat your own equipment. The process begins. Someone, it is hard to tell who started it, as the idea seems to bloom in the collective consciousness, takes his leather belt, cuts it into strips, and drops it into a pot of seawater over a low fire in the galley. Others follow suit. Soon, a small, grim consortium of amateur leather chefs is formed. You contribute one of your shoes, holding back its partner for a future, even more desperate day. The first step is to soften the leather. The shoe, which has been hardened by years of salt, sun, and grime, is scraped and pounded against a cannon breech to break it down. Then it is thrown into the cauldron. The goal is not to create a delicious meal, but to break down the tough, tan hide into something that can be physically swallowed and possibly, just possibly, provide a molecule of energy. The galley fills with a new, uniquely awful smell. It is not the familiar stench of rot or salt, but the acrid, chemical odor of boiling heightened old shoe polish. The water in the pot turns a murky brown. After several hours of simmering, the leather begins to soften, breaking down into a gelatinous, glue-like consistency. The result is a foul-looking, glutinous substance known by various names in sailors' accounts, the most common being shoe goo or some variation thereof. Silas the cook, now just another starving man, oversees the process with a detached air. He has no special ingredients to add, no culinary tricks to make this palatable. He is merely the tender of the fire. The men gather around the pot, their eyes fixed on the bubbling, brown sludge, their faces gaunt and wolf-like in the firelight. When it is steamed ready, the soup is ladled out in small, precious portions. You receive a cup of the hot, viscous liquid. It looks like melted tar and smells like a tannery. You take a sip. The texture is the most challenging part. It is thick, slimy, and sticks to the roof of your mouth. The taste is indescribably bad. A combination of salt, smoke, old sweat, and the faint, bitter taste of leather tanning chemicals. But it is warm, and it is something to put in your stomach. You force it down, swallow by swallow, fighting your body's every instinct to reject it. This desperate act of eating leather is a historical fact that shocks the modern imagination. But how nutritious was it? The answer, debated by historians and nutritionists, is barely. Leather is made of collagen, which is a protein. In theory, the body can break it down and extract some minimal caloric value. However, the tanning process, which uses chemicals like tannin to preserve the leather, makes much of this protein indigestible. It also introduces substances that are, frankly, poisonous. So, while it might provide a tiny amount of energy, it could also make you sick. The main benefit was likely psychological. The act of preparing and eating something, anything, provided a brief distraction from the reality of starvation and tricked the stomach into a fleeting sense of fullness. A lesser-known extension of this practice was the consumption of tallow or slush. Tallow was animal fat, used to make candles and to grease the moving parts of the ship's rigging. In times of famine, sailors would scrape this grease from the masts and ropes. It was a source of pure fat and calories, but it was oft unrancid and mixed with tar and grime. It was a foul, greasy substance that could cause severe stomach upset, but it was energy. The men who risked climbing the rigging in their weakened state to get it were taking a huge gamble for a mouthful of rancid fat. You finish your cup of shoe broth. It sits in your stomach like a lump of warm glue. You do not feel nourished. You feel slightly less empty. It is a pathetic victory, but it is a victory nonetheless. You have successfully consumed your own footwear. You look around at the other men, their faces slick with the greasy broth, There is no camaraderie in this meal. There is only a shared, bottomless degradation. You have crossed a new threshold of desperation. You are no longer just survivors. You are human locusts, consuming your own environment, devouring your own ship piece by piece. The question that hangs in the air, unspoken but felt by everyone, is a terrifying one. After the leather is gone, what is next? The foul, gelatinous memory of the boiled leather is still coating your tongue when the world is torn apart. The sky, which had been a placid, indifferent blue, turns on you with savage speed. A squall, born of nowhere, descends upon your weakened, ghostman ship. It is not a grand, theatrical storm like the one before. It is a short, vicious, and utterly catastrophic assault. The wind shrieks through the rigging. The few men strong enough to be on deck are swept away like dolls. The sails, which you lacked the manpower to furl properly, are ripped to shreds with a sound like a giant scream. A massive wave, the wall of dark green water, crashes over the deck, and with a sickening, final groan that you feel in your very bones, the mainmast splinters and collapses. The ship, your floating prison and your only home, is broken. It lurches, rolls, and begins to come apart, the sea pouring into the hold. It is chaos. It is a blur of splintering wood, roaring water, and the cries of drowning men. You are thrown against a bulkhead, your head striking something hard. You cling to a piece of floating debris as the ship sinks beneath you, a final, gurgling sigh swallowed by the churning waves. And then, silence, a ringing, terrifying silence, punctuated only by the heaving of the sea and your own ragged breaths. You bob in the water, clinging to a piece of the shattered deck. A few other survivors are scattered nearby, their pale faces ghostly in the gray. Post-storm light, the ship is gone, utterly. You are adrift in the middle of the ocean, with no food, no water, and no vessel. The last vestiges of your old life have been wiped from the face of the earth. After what feels like an eternity, that is probably only a few hours, you spot it, a dark shape through the haze. Land, the same current that destroyed you has, in a final act of cruel irony, delivered you to a shore. Hope, a feeling you thought long dead, surges through you with painful intensity. You and a handful of other survivors, maybe a dozen men in total, begin to paddle weakly toward it, using your hands and broken pieces of plank. You collapse onto a beach of coarse, black sand, the waves washing over your exhausted body. You have survived, but as you lift your head and take in your new home, the hope begins to curdle. This is no Caribbean paradise. It is a jagged, volcanic island, a spike of black rock thrusting out of the sea. There are no palm trees, no lush jungle, no sign of fresh water. The only vegetation is a sparse, hardy scrub clinging to the rocks. The island is barren, a prison made of stone. The first days are a desperate search. The survivors split up, crawling over the sharp volcanic rock, their feet cut and bleeding, their mouths parched. You are looking for a stream, a spring, a puddle of rainwater, anything. You find nothing. The rock is porous. Any rain that falls is instantly swallowed up. You find a few scuttling crabs on the shoreline and eat them raw. Their crunchy shells and salty flesh a momentary, desperate relief. You find a few seabird eggs in a cliffside nest and swallow them whole. But it is not enough. It is a snack, not sustenance. The lack of water is the most immediate crisis. Your thirst becomes a raging madness. Your tongue swells. Your throat feels like it is coated in sand. You try drinking seawater and are violently ill, leaving you even more dehydrated than before. The sun beats down, baking the black rock, reflecting the heat back at you. There is no shade, no escape. This is the ultimate survival nightmare, a scenario documented in the harrowing accounts of real-life castaways. Historians who study these accounts often focus on the psychological progression. First comes the desperate hope and activity. Then, as the reality of the situation sets in, comes the despair and lethargy. And finally, comes the breakdown of all social norms. The debate is not if it happens, but how quickly. On an island with no resources, the clock ticks with terrifying speed. You gather with the other survivors on the beach as the sun sets. You are gaunt, sunburned, dehydrated specters. The camaraderie of survival is gone, replaced by a raw, animalistic suspicion. You look at each other not as fellow men, but as rivals for the last crab, the last egg. The unspoken thought, the final, terrible taboo, begins to flicker in the back of your mind. It is a thought you try to push away, but it keeps returning, fueled by the relentless thirst and the gnawing fire in your belly. You look at the man next to you. He is weak, barely conscious. His breathing is shallow. He will not last the night. And the thought, ugly and undeniable, forms in your head. He is made of meat. He is made of water. In the sunken, haunted eyes of the other men, you see the same horrific calculation being made. The brotherhood of the sea is dead. The laws of God and man are a distant memory. Here, on this barren rock, there is only one law left: survive. And the price of survival is about to become monstrous. The sun rises on a new day of thirst and silence. The man who was weakest during the night is now gone, his body lying still on the black sand. No one speaks. No one moves towards him. There is a silent, collective understanding that a line has been crossed. A door opened that can never be closed again. The air is thick with a question that is too terrible to voice, but it hangs there, shimmering in the heat. This is the moment that haunts the darkest corners of maritime history. It is a subject spoken of in whispers, referred to by a chillingly euphemistic phrase, the custom of the sea. It is a custom born of the absolute last resort, a grim ritual enacted when starvation and thirst had stripped away every last shred of humanity. It is the practice of sanctioned cannibalism for survival. The custom had a horrifying, almost legalistic procedure to it. It was not a frenzied, chaotic act of murder. It was a cold, calculated decision made by the collective. When a group of castaways determined that one must be sacrificed for the many to live, they would resort to drawing lots. Straws would be cut to different lengths, or marked pebbles would be placed in a hat. Each man would draw. The one who drew the short straw was the designated victim. It was a lottery of life and death, a way of placing the horrific decision in the hands of fate, or God, rather than making it a simple act of murder. This process, historians argue, was a crucial psychological mechanism. It allowed the survivors to frame the act not as a choice, but as a tragic necessity dictated by an impartial system. On your barren rock, the custom is invoked. One of the older survivors, his voice a dry, rasping croak, explains the procedure. No one objects. The will to live has become a monstrous, elemental force, overriding all morality, all compassion. Short pieces of driftwood are gathered. One is marked with a sliver of charcoal from a long dead fire. They are placed in a tattered hat, the last relic of your sunken world. The men form a circle. The hat is passed around. Each man reaches in, his hand trembling, and pulls out a stick. You watch as the man before you draws his face a mask of terror that slowly dissolves into relief. Then the hat comes to you. Your heart is a frantic drum against your ribs. Your hand feels clumsy. Delian, you plunge it into the hat, your fingers fumbling against the smooth wood. You pull one out. You look down. It is a plain, unmarked stick. A wave of nausea and dizzying relief washes over you so intensely that your knees buckle. You are safe. For now, the hat moves on. The last man draws. He pulls out his hand and opens it. There, in his palm, lies the stick with the black mark. A low, keening sound escapes his lips. It is a sound of pure, animal despair. There is no fight. There is no struggle. He has lost the lottery. He accepts his fate with a kind of broken, terrifying calm. This is the part of the story that is almost impossible to comprehend, the part that historians who study these accounts still grapple with, the sheer psychological horror of that moment, for both the winner and the losers of the lottery, is a darkness that is hard to fathom. Did they feel guilt, or was the instinct to survive so overwhelming that it extinguished all other emotions? The few surviving accounts from those who endured such ordeals are often sparse on these details, the trauma too great to put into words. The act itself is carried out with a grim, butcherous efficiency. The body is treated not as a former comrade, but as a resource. It is meat. It is liquid. It is a collection of biological materials that can sustain the lives of the others. Nothing is wasted. The blood is drunk to quench the maddening thirst. The flesh is cut into strips and laid out on the hot black rocks to dry in the sun, creating a hideous form of jerky. You are forced to partake. To refuse would be to waste the sacrifice, to condemn yourself to the same fate. You chew the tough, sun-dried flesh. The taste is indescribable, a flavor your brain has no category for. It is the taste of ultimate transgression, the flavor of your own broken soul. You are no longer just a pirate, a survivor, a castaway. You are a ghoul, a cannibal. You have consumed your fellow man to purchase a few more days of miserable existence. You have now reached the absolute nadir of human experience. The romantic dream of pirate freedom has ended here, on a sun-scorched rock. With the taste of your crew mate in your mouth, you have paid the ultimate price for survival. And you know, with a chilling certainty, that even if you are rescued, even if you make it back to the world of men, you will never truly leave this island. A part of you will be forever trapped here, in this moment, chewing on this piece of dried human flesh, under the hot, unforgiving sun. The act is done, the price has been paid, but the hunger and thirst do not vanish. They are merely held at bay for a few precious days. The sun-dried strips of human flesh are your new rations. They are doled out in slivers, each piece a monstrous sacrament that binds the few of you who remain in a silent, unholy communion. There is no conversation. What could you possibly say to each other? You avoid each other's eyes, because in them you see a reflection of your own damnation. They know. Terrible routine begins. It is a life stripped of all illusion, all pretense. You are no longer men, but creatures. Your existence is reduced to three grim realities: the burning sun, the agonizing thirst, and the grim parcel of dried meat trapped in a piece of sailcloth. This is your life now. You chew the tough, stringy rations, and you try not to think about their origin, but it is impossible. Every bite is a reminder. Every swallow is an act of self-desecration. This is where the accounts of castaways often become vague, and for good reason. The trauma is too immense, but historians who study these events debate a chilling question. Was the custom of the sea, the drawing of lots, always as fair as the survivors claimed? Or was it sometimes a convenient fiction, a story agreed upon to cover up the simple, brutal reality that the weakest was killed by the strongest? In the fog of your own memory, you start to wonder. You wonder if the driftwood lottery was real, or if it was a fever dream, a collective hallucination to grant you all a sliver of deniability. You cannot be sure, and that uncertainty is perhaps the most terrifying thing of all. After a few days, the rations run low again. Another survivor, his mind long since broken by thirst and guilt, succumbs. There is no lottery this time. There is no discussion. The custom has become practice. The work is done with an methodical efficiency that is far more horrifying than the initial desperate act. The monstrous has become mundane. You are huddled in the scant shade of a rock, chewing on this second sacrifice, when one of the other men lets out a choked cry. He is pointing, his hand trembling, to the horizon. You follow his gaze, your sun-scorched eyes struggling to focus, and you see it. It is not a cloud. It is not a mirage. It is a sail. A real sail. On a real ship. The sight does not provoke joy. It provokes a frantic, animal panic. You are alive, but you are also evidence of a crime. For the first time in weeks, you feel a fear other than starvation. The fear of justice. The historical record is clear on this. While the custom of the sea was a known phenomenon, it was not a legal defense. Survivors who were rescued could, and sometimes were, tried for murder. The famous case of the yacht Mignonti would eventually set a legal precedent. Necessity is not an excuse for taking an innocent life. You are about to be saved from this rock, only to be potentially delivered to the gallows. But the instinct to live is stronger than the fear of punishment. You and the other survivors wave your arms. You shout with what little voice you have left. The ship sees you. It alters its course. It is coming for you. The moments that follow are a blur. A longboat is lowered, rowed by strong, healthy-looking men. Their faces, as they get closer, are masks of horror and pity. They look at you and your fellow survivors, gaunt, half-naked, sun-blackened specters surrounded by the grisly evidence of your survival, as if they are looking at beings from another world. You are hauled aboard the ship. The wooden deck feels alien beneath your bare feet. You are given water. It is cool and clean, and it feels like a miracle in your throat. You are given a piece of ship's biscuit. It is hardened plain, but it is not human. You hold it in your trembling hand, and you begin to weep. You cry with a force that double you at your entire, emaciated body. You are crying from relief, from pain, from a grief so profound you have no name for it. You survive. You outlasted the hunger, the scurvy, the storms, and the despair. You won the terrible game. But as you sit on the deck of your rescue ship, a saved man, you look at the simple, innocent biscuit in your hand, and you cannot eat it, because when you look at it, you see the face of the man who drew the short straw. The food of the golden age of piracy was a horror story of weevils, rot, and disease. But the worst thing you ever ate was the price of your own survival, and it is a taste you will never, ever forget. And so, the story ends. The long, desperate voyage is over. The waves that carried so much misery now gently rock you toward a different shore. Let the memory of that barren island fade. Let the taste of salt and sorrow dissolve into the quiet of the night. The hunger is gone. The thirst is quenched. There are no more storms on the horizon. Only the gentle, rhythmic breathing of your own slumber. You are safe now, far from the reach of that desperate sea. You are warm, in your own bed, wrapped in the soft, quiet comfort of the present moment. The darkness behind your eyes is not the darkness of a ship's hold, but a peaceful, welcoming space. It is a harbor, waiting for you. Let your thoughts drift like ships coming home to port. Their sails down, their journey's done. There is nothing left to do, nothing left to fear. Just the slow, easy tide of sleep, pulling you out into a calm and silent dream. The end of the article. Good night.